Previously, on the series premiere of Digging for Kryptonite. It was late 92, it was the winter of 92, and I was with my parents at the Galleria Mall in White Plains, New York. We passed by Heroes World, and in the window display was a Superman action figure in a little box to mimic a coffin. And my parents brought me in. They bought me the collected edition of the Death of Superman storyline. We went home, and I remember, I was 5, I wasn't reading yet, and I remember I sat on my dad's lap, and he read it to me, and he did the voices and the sound effects and all that stuff, and I still have that memory. And I was hooked, and I've been a fan ever since. But for me, it goes back to the Death of Superman, and that was how I became a Superman fan. And now, the 100th episode of Digging for Kryptonite. Welcome to the 100th episode of Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me for this milestone celebration is returning guest, comic book artist, and my buddy, V Ken Marion, in studio. Welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me. Great to be here. Yeah, man, this is great being in the studio. It's a very cool setup. So yeah, I'm so happy to be here, and I'm psyched for 100 episodes. This is great.
Yeah, I have a lot of thanks that I want to say as we make our way through the episode, but I'll start with you. You were here, not here physically, but here in spirit, virtually, when we did our first episode back in October 2020. You've been on the show a bunch of times. You've been such an enthusiastic supporter and participant in this endeavor, and I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate it too, and I'm glad to have been on the ride, and hopefully we'll do a lot more of this. And I've had so much fun, talking Superman and hanging with you and all that. It's been great, and I loved the one of the listeners gave me the nickname of the Green Ranger of Digging for Kryptonite, so I take that proudly. So thank you.
Yes. So speaking of listener feedback, I thought one of the things that maybe we can start with is opening up the Metropolis Mailbag, so to speak. So I put the call out to everyone for this episode. So normally, to borrow a phrase from the Talkville podcast, we have patron privilege, where patrons at a certain level can submit a comment or question to be addressed on the episode. But for this one, I opened it up to everyone, all levels of the Patreon, all non-patrons, because I just wanted to hear from folks and get a sense of what questions people have about the podcast, our fandoms, Superman, whatever the case may be. And we got a bunch of really good ones. So I thought we could start with that. Some are for me specifically, some are for both of us, some are directly for you, which is awesome. So I think we'll start by opening up the Metropolis Mailbag. After that, I want to talk a bit about the audience generally, like where people are around the world, and share some stats and things like that. Maybe read some reviews that people have left for us, which is always a wonderful thing. We did also have a little bit of homework for this episode. We read the Marv, Wolfman, Claudio Castellini Man and Superman story, which is relatively recent, though it was created over a decade ago, but a relatively recently released take on the origin story that really focuses on Clark's early days trying to make it, living and working in Metropolis. So we did have a little bit of homework, but mostly, just here to celebrate and kind of reflect on where we are in our respective Superman fan journeys, 100 episodes into this podcast. And again, a lot of thanks to share and certain specific groups that I'll thank as we make our way through. But I'll just say, I have loved doing this immensely. And I think one of the things that maybe is most surprising even to myself is that 100 episodes in, I'm still like chomping at the bit to do more of this. No joke, I have the next 100 episodes mapped out. There's room to maneuver.
That's still awesome to hear. That's really cool to hear. Because sometimes when you dive into something too much, you get a little burned out or whatever. And that's awesome to hear that you're still going strong and you got the next 100, the roadmap at least going. So very cool.
Yes. Like I said, there's definitely room to maneuver, but I know generally where we're going, and I'm really excited. And for all of the hours and hours and hours that I've spent reading and watching and thinking and talking about Superman, it's just, the mythology is so rich, and just being able to talk to you and all the other guests and get all these different perspectives, there's just always more to do. So again, everyone, mark your calendars for episode 200, a couple of years from now. All right, Let's start with some audience questions from the Metropolis mailbag. So this one here is from Grant Richter. Grant has been on the show before. He's going to be on the show again very shortly. We're going to be doing an episode on Tom King's Up in the Sky and Woman of Tomorrow. Grant is also the host of Truth, Justice, and Hope, a Superman podcast. This can be for both of us. He asks, is there an element from the Triangle era, our beloved Triangle era, a supporting cast member, villain, lost plot thread, etc., that you would like to see come back? Now, I know you've not really read much of the Triangle era, right?
I mean, I know the era, and I haven't read too much of the through line of it since I was a kid. So like I haven't read like as the story like you've been going back. But I mean, for me, this is an easy one. It's Steel. Like Steel's my boy. He was one of my favorite characters when I was a kid, and yeah, I just think he's got so much untapped potential. I know they've got a mini series coming out pretty soon. I think it's called Steelworks, and my friend Andrew Dahlhaus is coloring it, which is pretty cool. So shout out to them. But yeah, like I would just want to see Steel like more in the TV show, more in the cartoons, like an ongoing series, you know, have him more prominent in the DC universe with the Justice League or whatever. And he doesn't have to like, you know, become like the main character of the universe or whatever. Like I know that's unrealistic, but like, I just want to see like, you know, he's a great character and I think he deserves a lot more spotlight. And I think he's unique, you know, he's like a unique, cool character. So that for me, that's an easy one. And then I guess following up on that, I like Connor Kent Superboy is another character that has a soft spot in my heart, like that I grew up with really liking. So those would be my two.
And thankfully, there's currently that Superboy Man of Tomorrow miniseries. So, you know, he's making a little bit of a comeback. Again, in both of these instances with Steelworks and Man of Tomorrow, hopefully that leads to more. Hopefully these aren't just kind of one-offs to sort of placate the fans, but that we actually get more. No, I agree with that. It's funny you mentioned Steel. Obviously, we did our big episode on the Steel movie, and you and I were pretty high on that movie. I have to say, people seem to enjoy our episode, but I don't know how many hearts and minds we really changed when it comes to Steel. Because there have been some times where I've posted Steel-related stuff, and especially talking about the upcoming Flash movie and the multiverse and everything. I'm like, yeah, Michael Keaton is great. That's wonderful. But it's like, throw Shaq in there. Yeah. And I have not really gotten many people to co-sign on that. But I stand by our episode.
I agree too, man. Like I think that people want to go back and crap on Steel a lot, just like they do with like the movies like Shadow and Phantom too. Like, and if you go back and watch them, they're not up to the par of the movies we have now, but they're also not horrible. They're like kind of the time, and they kind of like are in the same line as like Batman Forever. Like to me, there's not much of a quality difference between Steel and Batman Forever. You know, it's like, it just one had a bigger stars and bigger, you know, budget, you know? But yeah, I mean, I do like that for Superboy coming back, that he's got his classic look with the jacket and stuff. Like, cause I never really liked when they just gave him the t-shirt. But yeah, Steel, I just hope they bring him back, man. Or I mean, I know they're bringing him back, but like, you know what I'm saying? Like, more like prominent.
A place of prominence. No, I hear you for sure. Can you just do me a quick favor? If you just push this down a little bit, the mic will be just a little bit lower. Perfect.
There we go. How's that?
So awesome.
Sorry about that, guys.
No, it's all good. So I guess my answer, the audience can guess what I'm going to say. It's always Conduit. It's always
nice.
Conduit. I always maintain that there's greater potential, untapped potential for that character. So not the most exciting answer for people who've been listening. I'm a broken record with this, but yeah, I would say Conduit.
I would also agree with that. Like, I remember that figure from the action figure line, and that like intrigued me so much as a kid. I just thought he looked so cool. So yeah.
Our next question from audience member Kenny Crowley about Kara Zor-El. How important do you feel she is to Superman? And how do you feel live action has treated Kara, or Kara, depending on your pronunciation?
I'll have you go on that one first. Let me think about this.
In fairness, audience, I am springing all of these questions on Ken. I did not tell him any of these ahead of time.
Off the cuff, totally off the cuff.
But I thought it'd be fun to get the off the cuff. I've not been dwelling on these, but I did obviously take a look at them, so I knew where we were going. It's funny. I think in the past, I would have said that Kara Zor-El is not particularly important to me in the context of the overall Superman mythology, but I think that's in large part, and I've talked about this before, like I grew up in a weird time with respect to Supergirl, because it wasn't, for the first decade almost essentially that I was reading comics, it was not Kara Zor-El. It was Matrix version, the protoplasm being who merged with Linda Danvers and became an Earthborn angel. Like, it was just a completely different take.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until early to mid 2000s with the 1-2 punch of that Supergirl arc from Superman Batman that you and I have talked about, that Michael Turner did the art. And then right around the same time, bringing in Laura Vandervoort to Smallville. And she looked just like she came right off the
Turner book,
the page of the Turner book. And then of course we had the live action Supergirl TV series. I guess one of the roadblocks to my enjoyment of the Supergirl show, and overall I liked it a lot. I thought the early seasons were particularly strong. I think Melissa Benoist is a wonderful Supergirl and a great actress. But I think that, to me at least, what makes the idea of Kara Zor-El interesting is that she had this whole life on Krypton and didn't have all of the time on Earth that Clark did. So she's more that fish out of water. And on the Supergirl show, they kind of had that where she was, 12 or 13 or whatever when she came to Earth. But then, we catch up with her a decade plus later. So she's had all this time to be on Earth. And I guess, and this, I'm not breaking any new ground. I think this is one of the criticisms that, you would often hear of the show, is that a lot of the villains, a lot of the plot lines that they gave to Supergirl were things that, if this had been a Superman show, you would have seen the same sort of thing. Like, it just sort of became kind of, Supergirl spins on traditional Superman, villains and plot lines and things like that. And you only had so much interaction between her and Clark. So I don't know. So I guess that's where everyone's mileage on the Supergirl show will vary. I think that's what held it back a little bit for me. But big picture, I've really come around just on the idea of Kara Zor-El, this idea that it's this living, breathing connection to his home world, this familial aspect. And again, sort of this twist on the idea that she was meant to protect him, and now he's, in that mentor role. So I've come around a lot.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm being honest, like, she was never a character that really resonated that much with me. Like, in terms of like basically before that Michael Turner arc with Superman, Batman, I never really even knew the character. Like, I saw the episodes of her on the cartoon show, which I don't even think it was Kara Zor-El. I think it was the white T-shirt version. She was Kara, but it wasn't Zor-El. She came from essentially a sister planet. So they were kind of like, oh, you're like my cousin, but it wasn't literally his cousin. Okay. Yeah. So like, I personally don't have too much of a connection to the character. I never watched the Supergirl show. So it's not like I don't dislike the character or like the character. I just don't have that much feelings that strong either way. I mean, I feel like with all these supporting characters, like Robin, Nightwing, all of them, like, they're not that essential to the Bat family is not that essential to Batman. Like, you can tell a great Batman story without Robin or Nightwing or Batgirl. Same thing with Superman. You can tell a great Superman story without Supergirl or Superboy or Steel, but they do add to the universe and make it like more fun and more characters for people to latch onto. So like, I think the idea of Supergirl is really cool. I just don't have much history with it,
No, I hear you. I will say, and over the course of this episode, I'll drop some teases of things we'll be covering in the future, but I have a whole block of Supergirl episodes that are on the list for next year.
Cool.
That kind of tie into, next year is going to have, I think, a pretty solid theme overall for the podcast next year, and Supergirl fits into that really nicely. And so as we've done with numerous other characters, Lex Luthor in particular, when we did our Across Time and Media run, we'll do something similar. And I mean, I'm excited to delve more into Kara Zor-El, but to be honest, that Peter David Supergirl series from the 90s where she's the Earthborn Angel, I never read the whole thing. I read the kind of the beginning and the end, and I've always kind of been intrigued by it, and I always wanted to go back and give it another shot all the way through. So
it's funny because I'm such a 90s kid. That might be the one that would resonate with me the most, just because like it's so different, but who knows? Yeah. I should check it out sometime.
I mean, that's it. Then even just talking about it, it's like this protoplasm. She merges with this dying girl. She becomes an Earthborn Angel. Like, it's insane.
Yeah.
But hey, I know that, that series has a lot of fans, and I do like what I've read of it. Gary Frank did the early art, and then Leonard Kirk did a bunch of it for a while. Anyway, we'll get to that. Okay, Romello Malone. He is one of the most active members of our Flat Squirrel Podcast Network Facebook group. Side note, folks, if you're not a member, please join. And look, as always, please connect on social media. So Digging for Kryptonite, it has pages or profiles on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We also have that Flat Squirrel Podcast Network Facebook group. You can email me, flatsquirrelproductions@gmail.com. Get in touch. I'd love to hear from folks. Kind of on that note, I could talk more about this when I sort of thank the audience, but it's like, there are certain people, and your old neighbor, Tim Bruns, is a perfect example where
shout out Tim.
I hear from him after almost every episode. He always has such kind words, and he's always sharing, his take or something else that he thinks might be of interest for me to read or watch or something like that. And he's not alone. Like, I hear from people all the time, and And I love that. And it's good. So I thank Tim. I thank everyone who reaches out. And I mentioned him in particular because there's this funny coincidence that you grew up next to him, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, the neighborhood where my parents lived, where I grew up, his family moved across the street in maybe when I was like in high school. And like, I never really knew him that much. Right. Like he's my neighbor and my parents were friendly, but I just wasn't, like never interacted that much. And then he like about a year ago told my parents, they were talking in the street, and he's like, yeah, I heard your son on Digging for Kryptonite. And then since then, like we've actually become pretty good friends. Like I whenever I go home, like I talk to him, and we text a lot. Like he'll always send me stuff from like back in the 90s, or like cool action figure designs that are coming out and stuff. So like we have a pretty cool friendship, like based off like Digging for Kryptonite, which is so crazy because he literally grew up across the street. So it's so funny. Small world.
I know. I love that. So Romello asks, his question points to Superman 2. Now, we've done on this podcast 2 episodes all about the 2 different versions of Superman 2. So he asks, if we worked at WB and wanted essentially to put out the best version of Superman 2, the movie, which one would it be? Would it be the Donner cut, the Lester cut, or a combined version? And how would you combine? I know that's a big question, but I guess the gut reaction of your preferred version of the movie. Is it Donner, is it Lester, or is it some sort of hypothetical blend?
Donner.
Yeah.
I mean, I love the line, General, do you want to step outside? I mean, I feel like that's like the only thing that's like anchoring me to the Lester cut was when Superman's like, General, care to step outside? Like, it's such a badass line. It's like, it's so iconic too in like the lore of the character, but it's tethered to that god-awful diner scene that like I can't wrap my head around that being a good, like, for people who complain about Superman snapping Zod's neck, saying that's out of character, which to a degree, yes, it is, but like I think him like picking a fight with like the diner guy is like so out of character. So like I don't know, I think, and the Donner version is a little more serious, so I like that. I don't know, maybe blend the 2 and just keep that one scene where he tells Zod to step outside. Maybe that's the only part I would keep.
It's interesting. Our friend Rob O'Connor from the All-Star Superfan podcast, he was on the George Reeves show with me a little while ago. But I saw he commented on a post recently about an upcoming screening of the Donner cut, and he expressed some frustration that the theatrical cut seems to be kind of getting pushed aside. And it's like, that's the version that we all grew up with, and I guess he doesn't want to see it lost in the shuffle. And I can identify with that. I think for me, ultimately, I do think what is probably the best version is a hybrid.
Mm-hmm.
If I had to pick, honestly, I still go Donner because I think, and I know, I won't rehash these episodes that we already did, but those Jor-El scenes complete a narrative and emotional arc that connect the 2 movies and really give you a beautiful, complete story. And so for the Jor-El scenes alone, I have to give the edge to Donner. But I do think if it were up to me, I love how the Donner cut pulled back on the slapstick. I did not miss that.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. Tone-wise, I go Donner. I think what I would keep from Lester, of course, the General, would you care to step outside? I mean, that's like insane to me that
yeah.
Like, and
it's so crazy because that totally doesn't fit the rest of the stuff he put in. Like, it's crazy that's what he did. Yeah.
But I think that the scene where Lois finds out that Clark is Superman from the Lester cut, where he trips and he falls into the fire, that I would keep that scene because
really
I would, for 2 reasons. One, the screen test that's in the Donner cut, it's just it's jarring. Like it doesn't fit with the rest of the movie.
True. Yeah.
As a deleted scene bonus feature, beautiful. I would love to see it. As far as like what's literally going to be in the movie, I would go with. And the other thing that I really do like,
you'd keep that like cornball hotel that they're in with the fire pit, the bearskin rug and everything. Oh, it's so weird.
You know what it is though? But that one scene, because what I think what puts it over the top for me is when Lois says, maybe you wanted to trip. Like maybe you wanted me to know. And I feel like that just kind of adds it layers something on top of it where it's like, oh, it's not just that he was clumsy or whatever. It's like, yeah, maybe there is a part of him that's tired of keeping up this ruse. So I would keep that. I would keep the General, would you care to step outside? And then very simply, and we've talked about this, and I think a lot of people are in agreement, excise the reversing time, and simply when he drops Lois off the balcony and flies away, that's the end of the movie. And it's this just bittersweet conclusion. And I think that's the perfect version of Superman 2 for me.
Yeah. I mean, I'd agree with that. And to the listener that you said was talking about the screening, what did you say his name was?
Rob.
So yeah, Rob, I would agree with you that so I'm not sure if you've listened to our other episodes, but like I only watched Superman 2 like twice in my whole life. Like I didn't watch a lot when I was a kid. So if I did watch a lot when I was a kid, like I did the first one, I would probably be in lockstep agreement with you that, yeah, that's the one we grew up with. It's a nostalgic one. I just didn't have that connection because I didn't have the VHS of it growing up. All I had was the first one. So for me, it was like, yeah, I just like this more serious tone, I guess, of the second one now as an adult. But like, if I did have those childhood nostalgia ties, I would be right there with you. It'd be like original cut.
Yeah, no, for sure. We have a couple of questions from Ethan Ronker and Bruce Kanan. These point to our other podcast, our sister podcast series, another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman. I don't have answers to these questions. Ask me when we get to episode 100 of that podcast. But Ethan asked, how many countries did Adventures of Superman play in, and how many different languages was it translated into? And then Bruce asked, basically talking about how the 6th season of the show sort of was a little bit of a return to form, bringing back a little bit more of the season 2 vibe after a few years of like really kid-friendly stories. So I don't really have answers to those. We'll see when we get there, but this is a perfect opportunity to just encourage everyone. If you haven't yet sampled another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman, Ken was a guest recently and is going to be a guest again. And one of the things that I've really tried to do with that show is, and I totally understand if someone's like, well, I've never really watched Adventures of Superman, or it's not particularly my thing. If the podcast doesn't speak to you, I get it. But, you know, we really go through each episode and we break it down and we give you everything you need. And we talk about not just that episode, but kind of how it applies, you know, throughout the rest of the Superman mythology. So there's a lot of, I think, fun Superman talk that's not only solely confined to Adventures of Superman. So it's been a blast. As of this recording, we're like 2/3 of the way through season 1. So we're really rocking there. And I hope people will check it out. And I thank you for being on. And I look forward to your return appearance when we do Ghost Wolf.
Oh, I can't wait. Yeah. And I also want to say to people that if you are a Superman fan, and I hope you are if you're watching this or listening to this, yeah, and you've never watched the Adventures of Superman, the George Reeves show, or if you've only ever seen like 1 or 2 episodes and like you have very little knowledge of it, I strongly encourage people to go check it out because it's a very, very, very fun, like cool, nostalgic show. So like, and even if you didn't grow up with it, like I think there's elements of like, if you just like kind of throwback TV, like I Love Lucy and stuff like that, if you grew up with stuff like that, this will also kind of harken to that kind of feeling that you would get from watching those old shows. So like, I definitely encourage people to check it out.
Yes, I cannot echo that more. Our next questions come from Rick Reason, the delightful Rick Reason on Twitter. Rick is another one of those guys like in the Tim category. No joke. Every week that I put out an episode of both shows, of this and another exciting episode, he listens seemingly always that first day if he's able to, quote tweets my original tweet and talks about how much he enjoyed the episode.
Oh, thanks, Rick.
And
That's awesome.
I really do appreciate it. It's funny because I always say, and it is true, that I would do this even if people weren't listening, because I do genuinely find it personally fulfilling, and I enjoy the prep and I enjoy the conversations, and I feel the conversations are worth having. At the same time, if I were putting this out and 10 people were downloading it and or I was just never hearing anything from anyone, yeah, I think it would probably be hard to sustain the enthusiasm and to do as much of it as I do. I think that's kind of the difference. It's not that, I wouldn't do it at all, but this really kind of adds fuel to the fire. And it's like, it makes me excited to think about the next 100 episodes. Cause it's like, yeah, like people are along for the ride here. So
yeah, no, I seriously, thank you so much, Rick and Tim and everyone who's like listening every week and engaging, like that's so cool. Like as content creators, like that's like so important for us and we appreciate it so much. So on behalf of Anthony and myself for all this stuff, like seriously, thank you so much.
Wait till we get to Brian's questions on the next page, because he has he describes you and it's perfect. We'll get to it in a second.
Is it Brian O'Day, or is it?
No, this is Brian Dempsey, one of our audience members and patrons. I don't know if Brian O'Day listens to the podcast. I don't know.
Brian, you gotta get on
that. One of my buddies from our old comic shop. Anyway, so Rick asks, why did you get into podcasting? Speaking of the comic shop. So I know I've talked about this, but when my old comic shop, Alternate Realities, announced that it was closing, I wanted to do something to chronicle the end. And I had listened to podcasts, Kevin Smith's podcast in particular, like in the early to mid 2000s. Like I was a big listener of those, and I just
Tell 'em Steve Dave. Did you ever listen to them?
I listened to Tell 'em Steve
I still
Dave.
listen to them. They're really funny. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I've fallen off, but I've definitely listened to a lot, and I just kind of fell in love with the form. I was like, oh, this is really cool, and I always kind of wanted to do something, but I don't know. I never really had an angle or a hook, and I was, in retrospect, it's like, you dummy, you should have just done it. It's like, why not? But
Yeah.
once the closing of the store came around, it's like, okay, now this is about something. And so My Comic Shop History was the first show that I did, and was my main focus for a really long time. And then currently, as we're doing this, we're in the final few episodes of My Comic Shop History. But as I knew that I was building towards the end of that, I didn't want to stop podcasting. And it was like, okay, what else would I be interested enough in to talk about indefinitely?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a short list. It's Superman. It begins and ends with Superman. And so, that's kind of what led here. And then, we've had these really kind of interesting organic outgrowths of this podcast with another exciting episode, and even Power Rangers, or Summoning the Zords, a Power Rangers fan journey, like kind of taking this approach, going through my fandom and everything, but kind of doing it in the context of that. So that's where it began. And then Rick also asked, how many episodes do you typically stay ahead? A couple. I'm not, it's not like I'm like 10 episodes ahead. I would say a couple. And for shows like the Reeves show or the Power Ranger show, those are bi-weekly. So 2 episodes ahead is a month. So that gives me a lot of breathing room. For Digging for Kryptonite, a couple episodes is a couple of weeks, but that's fine. It's funny. Like we did a Super Friends mixtape episode with Jeremy like last year, and it was a lot of fun. That was one that I had recorded really far in advance. And in our recording, we talked about how HBO Max, they had just announced there's going to be a Wonder Twins movie with KJ Apa from Riverdale. We talked all about it. And then in between recording and release, the movie got scrapped. And I was like, God damn it. And so it's like, I went in and I chopped it out. It's not a big deal. But that's one of the reasons I don't like to go so far ahead, because, you potentially run that risk. So I like to stay pretty close, but with a cushion. So if something falls apart, I have something else ready to go. And usually that's fine. Obviously at the beginning of this year, we missed an episode. I was sick. I didn't have anything in the bank. So it goes, but that's usually the goal.
Nice.
All right. We have a whole page of questions from Brian Dempsey.
All right. Let's do it, Brian.
So one of our patrons, and they're great questions, and I thank you, Brian. Brian is the most active when it comes to submitting questions at that Patreon level. And it's great. They're always really thoughtful, interesting questions. So let me start with what he said about you. This is great. It's funny because I wouldn't have said this, but when I read it, I was like, oh yeah, that's totally spot on. He goes, I just want to say that I appreciate it every time V Ken is on the podcast. He brings such enthusiasm. It's almost like he has to say what he's thinking or might explode. He's very infectious, which I think is spot on. Like that enthusiasm, man, it's palpable. And he says, and I identify with this a lot. You've really helped me a lot in this respect, Ken. Brian says, I'm more of a fan of writing and character arcs, but Ken's perspective has really opened my eyes to truly appreciating the art, the reason behind panel size and design, and those creators who can effectively tell stories visually. I mean, it's really
cool. That really means a lot, man. Thank you so much, Brian. Like that's so cool to hear.
And it's true. You hear me. I catch myself a lot on the show where, I make sure to talk about the art, even if it's, I know we don't spend as much time on it as we do the stories, but, I do always remind myself, this is a visual medium. And this comes up, I think, a lot when we talk about Grant Morrison, because that's a writer where if you don't have the right artist, some of those big ideas can kind of get lost in the shuffle, but you have an artist who can really kind of translate what Morrison is going for. And it's like, oh, I totally get this. And it works. So it's such a huge piece.
I mean, I think there's this weird divide in modern like fandom and the industry in general, where like there's this hard separation between the writer and the artist. And like, I really do think that like they need each other like symbiotically, and like you could have the best written story in the world, but if it's drawn poorly or boringly, it doesn't connect. And like, and that's something that like is so hard to like articulate like with people, like, and if they're not looking out for it, like it's one of those things that you're not even realizing it. When you're reading a comic, like sometimes you might like you might think that was a terrible story, but really it was just like the art didn't connect with you in a way that conveyed what the story was supposed to be doing. Right. And subsequently, like if there's really great art and like not a great story, that can like make the story seem better. Like, you know what I mean? Like just from like how the characters look and how the panels are laid out and what's focused on and what is made impactful, like that, like, I think like not more so. Sorry. I'm a lot of ideas kind of like swirling around right now.
No, I hear you.
From the idea of like, not only from what the actual style is, right? Like, cause like someone thinks like Jim Lee versus like, I don't know, like Frank Quitely or Ed McGuinness, right? Three very radically different styles. Like, aside from just like how they draw eyes or hair or faces, right? It's more like they each have their own way of interpreting and telling the story. And I think it's so like integral to the experience of reading. You know what I mean? Like it really does, like, cause if you actually read a comic book script, it's very like antiseptic. Like it's very hard to if you as a casual reader, if you just read like a script, like the stuff that I get before I draw it, like it doesn't read like a novel reads. Like it's very like it
doesn't conjure emotion.
Yeah,
necessarily.
no, yeah. It's you're doing a lot of the work in your head reading it, and so like I do wish there'd be more of a just in fandom and in editorial, everything, every part of the aspect of the industry would be more of less about pitting it art versus writing and more of them together as like a team or like a single like creative voice, because I do think they're both really important. Like because like you need to have really good stories in comics, right? Like the writing's super important. Like the overall story is why you're there, right? But like how that's conveyed and the emotions that are felt, that's mostly through the art. And like, yeah, I think there should be a lot more of a conjoining of both ideas, if that makes sense.
No, well said. No, I agree with that. So Brian has some questions for you, some questions for me, some questions for both of us. I'll start with one of the ones for you first. He says, again, another Triangle era question. If you could have worked on Superman during the Triangle era, we'll assume there's a time machine because you were a child at the time.
Yeah, I was, I was like 5, 6.
Which writer from the Triangle era would you most like to have been paired with, and why?
That's a good question. I mean, the go-to is Dan Jurgens, right? Because but I mean, Roger Stern did some good stuff too.
Yeah, Stern is up there.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's funny. I obviously, thinking of what you might say, I went to Jurgens, of course, as well. But I don't know. I think about like Louise Simonson on Man of Steel and
Steel, right? She did Steel.
Yeah, and Steel, yeah. And John Bogdanov was her primary penciler, and it was like his art in particular like really had this energy to it. I mean, your styles are different, but like that energy, I don't know. But
yeah, no, I mean, yeah, of course I would have loved to draw Steel. So yeah, Louise Simonson would have been awesome to draw Steel. That'd have been awesome, yeah.
I know. Look, all these answers kind of come together, right? It's like a common theme here with Steel.
Yeah, right.
All right, let's see. Brian asked me, but you can certainly answer this too. What is something you learned about Superman while producing this podcast you didn't know before and may not have ever known without it? I remain embarrassed about this, but that friggin' Ruby Spears cartoon from 1988.
It's true.
If you look,
I never even heard about that.
A couple of years ago, if you had put $1 million in front of me and said, all right, for $1 million, did this Ruby Spears cartoon exist? I would have said no.
Yeah, I have no memory of that. Like that was never played in reruns on any cartoon channel when we were growing up. So
yeah, I mean, there are a lot of different ways to answer this question. I mean, my appreciation for the character in so many facets has deepened. But I mean, as far as like, that was legit something I just didn't know that it existed.
Yeah. You know what though? I will say directly based on this podcast is Superman and Lois. I only watched that show because you told me to, because I thought that first little 2-minute thing they put out was so hokey and bad looking that like I was like, I can't watch this. But you told me it was really good. And we were just talking before we went live that I think Tyler Hoechlin might be one of the best Superman ever. Like, so like that I'll directly say to the show that I've watched the first season. I'm kind of behind. I haven't watched past season 1, mainly because my wife has not had the time. We haven't synced up the time to like watch together. So, but yeah, like that show, I love that show. It's a great show. And I've only watched it because of you telling me to. So that's a more relevant answer to now for me, for sure.
Yeah. And the perfect segue, because one of the questions that Brian had for both of us, please tell the audience if you saw the diner scene in Superman and Lois season 3, episode 4, and what you thought of it. So I am current on the show. It's funny. I watched that particular episode the day after. And I remember that the night that it aired, it was already starting to circulate on social media. And I didn't watch it, but I knew there was a diner scene. And of course, you think Superman, you think diner scene, you think of him beating up the bully in Superman 2. So I kind of had a sense of like, okay, we're in that territory. But I avoided spoilers. Now, as you said, you're behind on the show, but before we sat down to record, we pulled it up on YouTube for you, and you went and you watched it. So we've both seen it. What was your reaction to that scene?
I was just like, damn, this is cool. This is from season 3 or season 2?
The most current season. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't want to spoil too much for people who haven't watched, but essentially, this continues from the prior season where Superman and Lois' son, John, has been dating this girl named Candace, whose father is, this real dirtbag. And there's this sequence where plot line where he steals John's truck, and John, confronts him. And again, these are light spoilers. It's not ruining the season or anything like that. But the dad punches John and gives him a black eye, and then Lois goes to confront him, and he pulls a gun on her. And so then we build to this confrontation in the diner where Clark, not Superman, but Clark, and there was the preceding scene where John explains what's been going on, and Clark storms off, and Lois is like, Clark, like, this isn't a job for Superman. And he goes, he's not going. And it's just like, oh my God. And this is going to be good.
Oh, it was so good, dude. I didn't see that part. I just literally saw the diner part just now. But like, I was like, damn, this is so badass. This is what made me say like Tyler Hoechlin's one of the best Superman that there was. Cause like he's everything that you want him to be in that. So he's compassionate and caring, right? But he's also like, he's a badass, and you're not going to mess with him. And like, he's laying down the law, and like, he's like not letting anyone hurt him or his family or like people around, and he's doing it with authority and like commanding respect. And like, it's like, I think that aspect has been lost so much with Superman, like in so much media, in so many of the comic books, like they focus so much on him just being this like kind-hearted, gentle person. And like, that has to be there, but there needs to also be this other like tough aspect to him that is just always lost. So like, it was so cool to see that.
Yeah. I've mentioned a number of times on the show, some of those, I know we did our episode on our top Smallville moments, but there are certain moments just in the Superman mythology generally that live rent-free in my head, as the saying goes. And the World of Cardboard line from the end of Justice League Unlimited, or the not impressed bit from Zack Snyder's Justice League.
That's a good one.
I mean, there's so many. This instantly rose to that level for me. In the moment of watching this scene, I was just like, oh, this is a scene I'm going to be pulling up on YouTube, and I'm going to be playing in my head a lot, because exactly to your point. And what you get to see in that scene is sort of the range of who this guy is, because he's tough and he takes no nonsense, but as soon as it's done, right, he turns around and he apologizes to the rest of the patrons. He's like, I'm sorry for interrupting your dinner. And he's throughout, from the beginning, he's concerned about how this guy's daughter is going to react, because she's there working as a waitress in the diner. Like, he tries to get this guy to go outside. He's like, I don't want your daughter to see this. And then, he apologizes to her at the end. And I think the other thing about it that's so cool is like, yeah, we know that Clark knows going into this guy can't hurt him, but you watch it and it's like, that wouldn't make a difference, right? Like, it's the way he carries himself. To me, it's like, that's what Pa Kent would do, and what Clark maybe even saw Pa Kent do at some point, right? Someone wrongs your family, you go in, you confront them. You're not tearing people's heads off, but there's going to be some sort of reckoning here.
Yeah.
And especially, as I always say on the show, but as a dad, and thinking about the specific context where you see your son's been hit by this grown man, it's like, it all just tracked and felt very real and believable. And even taking the Superman out of the equation, it just felt like, yep, this is exactly how this would play out. It was such a good scene. And I love, my second favorite part of the scene is just Kyle Cushing's reaction. He's like, damn, Kent.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. He's like one of the MVPs of the show. Him and Emmanuel Shrieky.
Yeah. It's I'm excited for you to get caught up. We did a whole episode on season 2. Season 2 was good, but they lost me a bit with, not to spoil, but all of the merging worlds and all that business. But this season so far has been very grounded, very emotional, really focused on the family and much more personal stakes. And I'm excited for you to see it. It's been great so far. I'm excited as it plays out.
As a side note, for listeners, Emmanuel Shrieky, who plays Lana Lang on the show, she was on a show called Entourage that we both really liked, and the guys who were the writer of the Entourage and two of the actors have a podcast called Victory the Podcast, and she was on one of the episodes and she was talking all about making the show and like one of her fight scenes, and she dislocated a shoulder. It was a whole big story, but it was a really great. If you like this show and you like her, she's so fun to listen to, and like she gives a lot of really cool insight into making the show, and it's like a really great listen. So check it out. Check out Victory the Podcast. A little plug for those guys, even though they clearly don't need it, but like yeah.
I really should save this for off mic, but I don't want to forget. Just yesterday, put up an episode. They finally got Adrian Grenier.
I listened to it. It was great. Yeah.
I just started. I haven't gone through the whole thing, but there was, they've been doing the show for so long and he hadn't been on, and there was all this talk like, do they get along? Is he mad at them? Blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I was like, oh my God,
he's like a farmer now. Like he's just not like, he's like, it's crazy.
It's amazing. So, so Brian, but we love that. So let's see. Again, this is directed to me, but you can answer. But I think this is, since I've been doing all of this homework, what issue, story arc, or media program have you read or watched for the podcast that you never want to reread or revisit? Okay. Thankfully,
that's a mean question. Like,
thankfully, it's a real short list, honestly. And I think for the most part, even when I've been a little bit more down on something or more critical or poked more fun, whatever the case may be, nevertheless, there are very, very few instances where I really felt like, man, this was really tough to get through. I don't think I could ever do this again. The couple of things that come to mind, sad to say, those Kirk Allen movie serials, those were hard. Those were really tough to get through. And like we talked about, I think what made it difficult is those were not at all meant to be binged. And that's the way I tried to watch it. So if I ever were to attempt those again, I would probably do one a night or one a week or something like that. And I guess it would be more digestible, but even within that, I don't know that I really would ever have much of a drive to go back to those again, but definitely trying to watch them the way I did. That was tough. And then Frank Miller's Superman Year One, that one really pissed me off. I just thought that was terrible. And it was just so, I don't know.
I haven't actually read it, so I can't, that's a mean question. It was really that bad. You thought it was that bad?
I thought it was that bad.
Who drew that?
John Romita Jr.
Okay. He's a good artist. I like John Romita Jr.
Yeah. It just, I don't know. We did a whole episode.
Was it just like, was it the characterization that you didn't like? Because I did listen to your episode, but I can't, it's not fresh in my head. Like wasn't the characterization wasn't there? Like, was that it?
It was the characterization, but it was more just where the story went. There's this whole extended sequence where he's like living in Atlantis with Lori Lamaris, and then the end just felt so abrupt. It just, I didn't feel like it really had anything additive to the mythology. There've been so many tellings of the origin story. And look, the one that we read for this episode, Man and Superman, at least that was this attempt to say, okay, we're really going to drill down on the early days of Metropolis. There's a whole sequence where he's working as a janitor, right? Because he's trying to get his foot in the door at the Daily Planet. And it's like, okay, you get to see him take in this huge city, which is such a big departure from the farm. So it's one of those things where it's like, okay, that is kind of adding something. I just felt like the Frank Miller story just didn't contribute anything. I don't mean to continue to beat up on it, but those are again a couple of instances where I just really felt like, man, this is a little tough. But look, 2 episodes out of 100. I mean, mostly everything that we've looked at or read or watched or listened to, there's not much else that I'd be like, please don't ever show that to me again.
I mean, if I had to just kind of like, going back to the stuff that like, other than like comic books that were just forgettable that I'm probably never going to read again, because like I don't even remember them, kind of thing, because I've read so many Superman comics, like, so I'm sure there's like some issues in there that like just for whatever reason I'll just never go back to. But like the big stuff, I feel like Superman 3 is something that I like never want to watch again. Like it's like I hated it when I saw it for the first time when I was like in my 20s, and I just thought it was so atrocious. And Superman 4 is not much better, but at least there's like some fighting with a villain. Whereas like Superman 3, it's like he's fighting like old people, like it's like old computer grammar. It's just, it's so boring and weird. And like, it's one for me. It just doesn't resonate with me. So, and unless like my future children want to watch it, then maybe I'll watch it. But like, I will never watch that again on my own.
I'm with you on Superman 3 as well. And I agree with you. Superman 4 at least tried, was trying to be about something.
Yeah, exactly. About the nuclear thing, and they have a villain. Like, Superman 3 just feels like a weird, like, oh, Richard Pryor's a hot comedian, let's throw him in there for no reason. It's very strange. Yeah.
Yes. All right, let's see. Another question for you. what are you, what are your favorite and least favorite things, Ken, about being a professional artist?
Oh man, that's I mean, favorite obviously is like you get, well, I mean, you get to draw for a living, which is awesome, you know, and I get to make my own schedule. I get to work from home, which is cool. So I can like, you know, make my own food and work out whenever I want and like stuff like that. So it's cool to make your own schedule. But downside of it is that mostly means you're working almost every day. So like 6 to 7 days a week. I mean, like, so usually, yeah, it's almost always working on the weekends, and unless there's like a vacation or something. But like that, and then just like the deadline grind is like it's very like stressful for sure. Like, so that can sometimes, and then also like, I mean, this is compound with deadline grind, but like having to get stuff done by a certain time, even when like you're creatively like not feeling it or not, the juices aren't flowing, you still got to push through it. And like, and that can be sometimes some of the most depressing, stressful times ever. So, yeah, that's probably the hardest part, is just like the deadlines and then just the sheer amount of work that drawing comics is. Like, it's very, very time consuming. So please appreciate your artist when you read comics. Like, even if you don't like the style or whatever, just like know that they worked really hard on it, you know, like, because that's kind of what I've come down to. When I was younger, I would think like, oh, this art sucks. Like, I don't like, and it's like, no one who works professionally's art sucks. It just doesn't either resonate with you or not, you know, like, so, and it's totally subjective. And I know that there's people out there who like love my stuff, and I'm like so grateful for that. And thank you so much for all the support for everyone. And I know there's people out there who probably hate my stuff, and like, and it's not a reflection of how hard I worked on it. It's just, it just doesn't resonate with them. So, so yeah, so that's, and then also that also can be a kind of negative thing too, when people like say like mean things about your work online, like that can, but that you have to, if you're going to step out into like any sort of public degree whatsoever, you kind of have to expect there's going to be people who are not going to like what you do, and you just can't let it bother you. You know, you just have to, just put that shield up and like not engage with negativity and just like not let it bother you, you know? So, but yeah, but overall I wouldn't change it. Like, I love drawing and I love telling stories and I love making comics, and yeah, that's the best part of it, you know, is getting to be creative for a living.
Oh, right on. No, it's funny. So in a little bit, I'll read some of our Apple podcast reviews. Not too long ago, because I do check periodically just to kind of see what, you know, if we got any new ratings, reviews, what people are saying, what people are thinking. I'm pretty sure it was one person because of the timing of this, but like someone went on a 1-star rating spree of like all my shows. And I was just like, okay, like they didn't write a review, so I don't know what the issue was.
Yeah.
But I just saw these 1-star ratings pop up, and it's like, okay, you know, it is what it is. But what I kind of to your point, what I think to myself is like, okay, the show is reaching more people, right? And the more people you reach, again, some will like it, some won't, you know, and it could be any number of things. I could have expressed some opinion in something that someone was to just set them off. I mean, I have no idea.
Yeah.
So, you know, but yeah, you just I try to focus on, again, certainly all of the, you know, the positive feedback, and also the idea you can't please everybody. And
you're never going to, yeah.
Like the more people you're reaching, and that's kind of like the positive that I really try to focus on. It's like, well, you know, we're getting it out there, like people are consuming it. And so, you know, you kind of have to be willing to take that.
Yeah. It's all part of like growing it, right? Like if you have a very small audience and it's like super dedicated fan base, that's great. But then the bigger you get, right, the more opportunities are going to be for people who do not like it, you know? And like, that's just the nature of like entertainment, right? Like, not like the best band in the world, like, because someone's like least favorite band, you know what I mean? Like, there's someone out there who the Beatles is like their end all be all, and there's someone out there who like hates the Beatles. It's their least favorite like musical act ever. So like, it's just the nature of it, you know?
And to your other point, you know, because I know I offer this disclaimer a lot, and I don't know if people are tired of hearing it, but, you know, when we are critical of something, I always do make the point of like, hey, I still appreciate the work and the effort that went into this, because that exactly. And especially now, as whether it's this podcast or documentaries that I make, whatever it is, it's like, yeah, there's a ton of work. Like if it just doesn't work, even objectively or subjectively, it's just not your whatever it is, there's still so much that goes into it. So that's why, you know, I do always say that. And that's one of the groups of people I want to thank as we're here at episode 100, the creators whose work we've talked about for 100 episodes, because you know, there would be no podcast otherwise. They've all contributed to this vast mythology for 85 years. And yeah, even stuff that doesn't work or doesn't work for me, you know, I still appreciate what went into it. Again, I think I don't mean to keep beating up on Superman Year One, but I just feel like where I think if I ever do have like genuine frustration, it's like kind of the intention. If I feel like something wasn't particularly well intentioned or just whatever the case may be, like misguided. But again, those are very fleeting instances.
But
I mean,
like,
I feel like people are always trying to do something worthwhile.
Yeah, but even like with that, like Superman Earth 1, I can guarantee you John Romita Jr. worked his ass off
Yes.
drawing it. You know what I mean? It's like there's still like so much work that went into it. Like
the art was fine. I didn't mind the art.
Yeah, no, I really like John Romita Jr. is great. He's a great storyteller, and like he's got really cool like his panels are so full, you know, like he's like putting so many backgrounds and stuff like that. If I can go on like a little tangent, art tangent here, like that I've noticed that historically comics, a lot of comics from all over the world, like it's kind of meant to be made quickly, right? And like the comics we grew up loving in like the 70s, 80s, 90s, like it wasn't really until the late 90s through the early 2000s that kind of went to now where I feel like the quality of what's expected is so insane in terms of like how much backgrounds like editors want. Like and I kind of think it actually hurts the reading experience too, because it slows you down a lot, right? And yeah, I kind of want there to be like a move to go back to like more simpler, not, and I don't mean simpler in terms of like less lines. I mean simpler in terms of like big characters, backgrounds only when needed, you know, kind of thing. Like just because like it's so much work, and when you're reading comics, like a lot of people just kind of like blow through that stuff anyway, and it doesn't really like register, you know. Like a good example is the book that we read for this, is the 100-page spectacular. The artist who drew that, he worked his ass off. Like there's so many crowd scenes, so many backgrounds, but when I was reading it, I was like realizing like I'm just kind of like flying through this, and like it's like what's the point of like because I can guarantee you he took him like 2 or 3 days to draw those pages. They're so dense, and so it's like, and I know there's a thing now where people like complain about comics being late, and like a lot of that always comes down to the artist because it's so much work drawing like these super detailed, lush, you know, intense like backgrounds and stuff. So I don't know. It's just food for thought.
No,
you know?
that is a great point. I totally get what you're saying here. Let's see. He next asked about creator interviews. Brian said, you've had Mark Waid on the podcast, but are there any other Superman creators, living or dead, that you wish you could also interview? I'll leave we'll just within the realm of who we could potentially get.
Oh, I have an answer for the dead one.
Oh, who?
Yeah, Michael Turner. That'd be I mean, he was like one of my all-time favorite artists, like my number 1 or 2, depending on the day, you know, like he's like one of my biggest inspirations. And like he did one of my favorite stories for Superman, which is the Supergirl arc in Superman Batman. So yeah, I would love to like talk to him for like an hour. That'd be amazing.
No, that is a good answer.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've addressed this before. Like I've not really pursued, other than that Wade interview where I really wanted to ask him about Birthright.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've not pursued it, and maybe at some point I will. I guess I don't know how to explain this. It's I don't want to, like, I wouldn't want to do it just to do it. Although, you know, it from a, you know, sort of tactical standpoint, it would probably make sense because I would probably get more, you know, eyes and ears on the podcast. So there's value in that. And it's not that I wouldn't enjoy talking to Dan Jurgens, for example. He's a good example to go to because that seems like such a no-brainer, right?
Mm-hmm.
My affection and history with that, the Superman, of course. But I guess part of it is, what would I say to him or ask him that hasn't been said or asked? And I think if and when I'm able to answer those questions and really come up with something that I think would be interesting for me, for him, for the audience, I would just happily try to reach out and see if we could get him on.
Well, I got a list for you that I would like to hear you.
All right.
Okay.
Please.
So Lionel Yu, who's the artist on Birthright, I would love to hear you talk to him.
Yeah.
I think he lives in the Philippines, so the timing on that would be like kind of crazy. It'd probably either be like super early morning or for one of you guys. Zack Snyder, I would love to hear you talk to. You know, that'd be great because I'm sure you could talk to him for forever about it. Frank Miller, I would love to hear you talk to Frank Miller about like his thoughts on Superman, and not just Superman Earth Year One, but just like his as a character. You know what I mean? Because like he's a polarizing figure, I feel like, among the Superman fandom, right? Like people either really like what he does or really don't like it. So it'd be interesting to hear your take, like hear you ask him questions like that. And there was one, Jeff Johns. That's the other one. Jeff Johns is someone I would like to hear you interview.
Interesting.
It's kind of like an all-star list here. So
yeah. No.
Yeah. I mean, Dan Jurgens too, obviously. Like,
well, audience, if there are people you would want to hear me talk to, well, let me know, and we'll see if maybe we can make that happen.
Dude, Henry Cavill. Dude, there's so many people you could get to like.
Yes. Honestly,
Tyler Hoechlin, yeah.
Yeah, no, that would be cool. Actually, kind of on that note, let me ask you something, because what I know a lot of Superman fans always like to talk about is sort of your best of list, like your favorite Superman actor or top 5 Superman. Yeah, a lot of times it's specifically in the context of the actors. That's I feel like where you hear it the most. And a lot of times if I've guested on another podcast, not so much if we're there to talk about something specific, but if it's more of like a general Superman talk, that almost always comes up. Is that something that do you have a list that's ready to go off the top of your head?
I mean, my number 1 and 2 are always going to be Christopher Reeve and Tom Welling, just purely from like childhood nostalgia. And I think they're both great. Like, so it's not like, I don't think that's challenged, but I do really think Tyler Hoechlin's awesome. Like, I think he's great. And I think him and Henry Cavill, they're different and I like them equally, but I like them equally, but different, like, so, yeah. Do you have a list?
Well, 2 things. Number 1, yeah, Tom Welling is always on it and at the top, but I notice sometimes he's not on people's list because of this sort of like, well, he wasn't actually Superman.
He was Superman.
I agree. And so, but it's, I guess, from an emotional standpoint, yeah, I mean, Tom Welling is always my number 1. I mean, Smallville was so formative, but I don't want to say, I reject the question, but one of the main things I've learned here is that there's room for a lot of different versions. Like Dean Cain,
he's good.
Maybe not the best Superman, but a great Clark and a perfect Clark for that show.
Yeah.
I've been doing a fair amount of rewatching of Lois and Clark over these past couple of years, and it's like, man, the chemistry between those two was on fire. It did, I think, a really good job of bringing the world of Metropolis and the Daily Planet newsroom to life. In terms of villains or plot lines, maybe not so much, but in terms of just that vibe and that world of Metropolis, it really felt like those Triangle comics brought to life. And
it was a good show.
It gave you an exploration of their relationship that you hadn't, the time and the depth that you got there is something that you don't typically see, or certainly hadn't seen, to that point. So I think that's a very underrated entry.
Terry Hatcher is on very high on my list for the best Lois Lanes. She's probably my number 2 behind Erica Durance. Probably, if I'm quickly going through them in my head. I think, yeah, she's great. Like that's a really good show. It's underrated. I think as Superman fans, we're kind of lucky in the sense that I don't think there's been a single actor that I've seen that I can think of that was bad, right? Like I think Batman has a couple that are like not that great, like, whereas like Superman, like I think every one of them has been pretty good. Like there's never one, I mean, people have their own lists, right, of which one they like better or whatnot, but like I think at a baseline they've all been like good,
I agree totally. And that's why I think it's hard to rank them necessarily too, because it depends what era, it depends what take on the character. If we're talking a good golden age takeoff on the character, George Reeves. I mean, George Reeves is one of my favorite.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be doing this other podcast otherwise.
He's great. Yeah.
Again, I think from that emotional standpoint, yeah, I always go Tom Welling. Although I don't know, if you like woke me up in the middle of the night and you're like, who's Superman? I don't know. Maybe Christopher Reeve would be the first. I mean, that's so indelible, so iconic, but yeah, in terms of just like what really
Christopher Reeve for me, like his Superman is like awesome, but I don't like his Clark take as much.
Yes.
Whereas like there's other, like you're talking about Dean Cain, where his Superman's like okay, but his Clark is like really good. And then and George Reeves, that's my dad's favorite one. They'll always be my dad's favorite Superman because it's the one he grew up with, and like it's such a I don't want to say unique because it's very golden age, but like it's so different from everything that's come after, Yeah.
No, absolutely. No, I agree with you. I don't look, if I had a least favorite, going back to those movie serials, Kirk Allen, but even Kirk Allen did some interesting things there. And he did, in fairness, a better job than George Reeves in differentiating the characters. He did, so, even
was he the first?
He was the first too. So it's like, in fairness,
I've actually never seen those. So I would be talking out of,
they're worth watching at least like a few minutes of just to get a feel for it. But it's again, going back to what I said earlier, I don't know that I'd be like, oh, you got to sit down and watch them all.
Did you ever see the Batman ones of those?
I own them. I have not seen them
because my dad has those, and we tried watching it, and those are horrendous. Like those are so crazy bad. Like, yeah, that's.
I don't have those. Our last question from Perry Constantine. Perry has been on the show and will be on the show again very shortly. We're going to be doing an episode on Stephen T. Siegel's autobiographical original graphic novel, It's a Bird. And Perry also hosts the Superhero Cinephiles podcast, which I've been on a couple of times. I hope people will check that out. he says, if you had an opportunity to write a Superman story, what would you do? If you can't think of anything specific, what are some things you think would definitely be in it? So, Perry, I have my answer to that, and I'm not sharing it because maybe one day I'll get the chance to do it. I've never written a comic, and it's not something that I've ever truly specifically aspired to, but I've always felt I have at least one Superman story in me. And especially over the course of doing this podcast and looking at the history and the evolution of the character, I actually have like a fairly specific idea of what I would want to do. And I think it would be really cool. And what will ultimately happen, maybe one day I'll write it and we'll like read it out on the podcast or something like that. But I don't know. I do know the editor. Cool. I do know the editor there. So maybe, I mean, I don't know.
Oh
maybe
yeah, you do.
It is like,
and I think he's the Superman editor, right, Paul?
Yeah. So the one thing I'll say, because I've
shout out Paul. Yeah. Which is crazy. I've worked with Paul a number of years, and I've always forget to bring up that I know you, which is so fun. So I feel like at this time whenever I do bring it up, it's going to be one of these weird things at this point where it's like, why didn't I bring this up years ago? You know?
But yeah, so I mean, I kind of know what I would want to do, or at least the general setup and vibe of it. But I will say, because I've gone on record, if I ever write anything Superman related, he's getting thrown in the sun, because I just think it's hilarious. It's great. It's just this running bit of like every time he's powerless, he's just thrown in the sun. Oh. He's fine. So that'll be
nice,
in there. But
nice.
Now, obviously, you've drawn Superman. Is there anything in the world of Superman? And you take this question wherever you want, but anything Superman related, I guess maybe Steel, that you haven't had the chance to draw, a villain, a setting, anything.
I mean, yeah. So to answer the original question, I do have like a story for Superman that I would want to tell, that I would want to write and draw. Like, and I don't want to go into details of it because it's not 100% fully fleshed out in my head, what, details or whatever. But I would say that I would create new villains. That would be like a big thing that I want to do. Like, I wouldn't want to touch Lex Luthor. I feel like a lot of those characters are so played out. Like, I want to create new villains, and I would really want to dial up the toughness action side of Superman, and like, while also retaining the heart and the spirit and like sort of like the I'm never going to give up kind of like strength of the character. But I do think that, as I've said many times, I feel like he's been nerfed a lot over the years, and like, I want to tell a story of someone like as strong as Superman, like how do you challenge him and make it like compelling, and not like how do you challenge his brain, because every writer does that. Everyone's like, well this time he won't be able to punch his way out of it, and it's like, well, okay, that's literally every comic of Superman is him like mentally figuring it out. So it's like I just want to kind of like, I'm a big Dragon Ball Z fan, and like a lot of the things that have been applied with Goku, I feel like could be applied in a way to Superman, like. Because a lot of the complaints of Superman is like, oh, you got to make mental problems for him because he's so strong, nothing can stop him. It's like, well, my argument to that is always like, Goku is so much stronger than Superman. Like, if they got into a fight, he'd like blow Superman apart, like in like no problem. And like, but and a lot of anime characters like this, they're very, very powerful, but they still find ways to challenge them in a visual action setting, as well as mentally, as well as emotionally. Like, so that would be something that would be very forefront in my mind of. Like, I want Superman to be challenged on all three levels of like emotionally, mentally, and physically, and not just the mentally, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I dig that.
Yeah.
So I thank all of the audience members who submitted questions. That was our Metropolis Mailbag segment of our 100th episode here. Ken, you've been on the show a bunch of times. I meant to crunch the numbers and see exactly how many times, but I neglected to do that. But you've been on a bunch. Do you have a favorite episode of the ones you've done?
Ooh. Oh man, I have to go back to think. I mean, I really liked our Zack Snyder Justice League episode. That was the Snyder Cut. That was a good one. When we talked about the Superman Batman arcs that Jeff Loeb did with Michael Turner and Ed McGuinness, that was a lot of fun. And the Steel movie one was good. That was a fun one, man. There's so many that I'm like, we've done a lot, and they're crisscrossing in my head because I did some of your Power Rangers ones and the Smallville one that we did from was that a Patreon exclusive?
No, that was for the main show.
No, the first one we did.
Oh yeah, that was years ago. That was for Patreon.
Yeah, that was a great one. That was a good one. So
I know. No, there's not a bad one in the bunch. I've enjoyed. Honestly, it maybe sounds like I'm just saying it, but I mean it sincerely. I mean, I enjoy all of the episodes with you and all of the other guests. And I think part of it is that and I think the audience hopefully has gotten the sense, like, none of this is willy-nilly. I mean, I put a lot of thought into what we're going to cover and who's going to be on to cover it. And so hopefully there's enough in the prep where when we get to the episode, it's like we have all of the ingredients there. So that's why I'm able to to enjoy them. I would say, yeah, for the ones that I really have enjoyed them all. The Zack Snyder's Justice League, it's like, it was such a profound experience watching that movie, and I was so excited to talk about it with you, and I had such a great time doing it. And that's why, this is not to get into the Snyder stuff, but it's like, regardless of what anyone says or thinks or feels about that movie, that universe, whatever, nothing will ever take away from that 3 a.m. to 7 a.m. experience that I had in March of 2021 when that movie came out. It's like, I could not have been more excited, and usually that's a recipe for disappointment.
Yeah.
And instead, I just had the best time, and it was so
cool.
fun to talk about. And so that's why, that's kind of how I make peace with the movie side of it all. It's like, you know what? I got that movie. It was everything I wanted it to be. It gave me that Clark's walk through the fortress where he hears the voices of his fathers. Your heart was tested, but you gave hope to their world. It's time, son, fly. The not impressed bit. It's like, these are some of my favorite Superman moments from anything. So it's like, I will always have that.
Yeah. It's a good movie, man. It's good. I have not watched it since because it's so long. So I will say that. But yeah, no, it was a lot of fun. And that was one where I was so excited about it. Part of me was like, is it really going to be that much better? And it was. I was so excited, but apprehensive. And like, I had a great time with it. I went through like 4 sessions of popcorn, went through, like popping 4 giant bowls of popcorn. It was great.
It was. The first episode of Digging for Kryptonite that you were on was another Snyder episode. It was in defense of Zack Snyder's Superman.
Yeah.
That was one of the earliest episodes we recorded. It was the first time we were using Ecamm, this video conferencing platform. There were tornado warnings as we were recording. You got knocked off a couple of times. All of it is in the episode. I didn't edit it. But it was like, it was just this early instance, I think, of what this podcast could be. Like, we're really diving in. It was a long episode. It wasn't the first long episode, but it was an early episode that went long, and it was just, just diving in and really digging and having these conversations. I think it was just so much fun, and it really helped the episodes before it as well. But that one in particular, just galvanized me. Like, all right, this is what, I just want to get into it and keep doing this. So. Yeah. It was a lot of fun.
That's so cool, man. That's so cool to hear. I've always had so much fun on every time you've had me on. It's so fun to hang out and talk about this stuff and just nerd out and I wish I grew up in the same area as you, so we could have been friends all these years, talking about Superman and everything at the comic store and everything.
I know. But hey, at least we connected. We made up for lost time, and that's a good segue. I want to talk a bit about the audience, where people are from, and share some of their reviews. And there's actually, you know what? I'm gonna jump to this first because on the note of what you just said, the very first review, and I'm not gonna read all the reviews. This will get masturbatory at a certain point. So it's
we'll read the terrible ones. We'll read the bad ones too.
But the very first review that came through was October 25th, 2020. And our pilot episode was the only one that was out yet. So this only speaks to what you and I did in that first episode. And it's from BJD 1975. But he said, this was like listening to 2 of my friends discussing my favorite character, 2 friends who understood my favorite character. Love it. I'm hooked. So glad I didn't have to wait until 2021 because that was the original release plan, but we moved it up. He said, bring on the next episode. So
thanks, man. Thank you. That's awesome to hear. I hope you're still listening. I hope you still like content,
Yeah, I probably lost him with episode 2. No.
The Superman 2 episode.
But I want to say, so we are, as of this recording, we're closing in. We're close to 40,000 downloads. That's not per episode. That's overall. But, there's a range, right? And obviously the biggest podcasts out there get, tens or hundreds of thousands of downloads per episode. That's a different category. But there's one of the podcast hosting services. I don't know if it was Buzzsprout or something like that. I don't know. They put out some stats not too long ago. And it was basically if you get 72 downloads or something like that within your first week, that puts you in the top quarter of podcasts or something like that, because there's so many podcasts out there. So that's just to say we're in good shape. I always want more people to find the show and always want to grow, but it means the world to me that we've reached as many people as we have. The vast majority of people are listening via Apple. Spotify was number 2, but at a distant second. I know there are some people who are just not Apple users at all, but most people seem to be consuming that way. Perhaps unsurprisingly, 81% of our audience is in the United States. But We have audience members in the UK, Canada, Australia, Spain, Hong Kong, Japan, Brazil, Ireland, Mexico, Greece, Germany, Sweden, Peru, Philippines,
Oh,
France.
so awesome.
Now, the numbers get smaller and smaller as we go down here, but Singapore, Russia, Denmark, Taiwan, Austria, South Africa, Italy, New Zealand, Switzerland.
Is this only through Apple or is this through everything?
This is through everything.
Okay.
And as far as guests we've had throughout the United States, we have people from Florida, Ohio, Texas, California, North Carolina. I mean, I've connected with people I've never been in the same room with, but we've been able to have them on. And then from around the world, I've had guests from Japan, the UK, Australia, Ireland. It's
so awesome.
It's really one of the things that has been, again, really this unexpected delight of doing this, is just connecting with so many people. And I was going back and I was listening to a little bit of the first episode that we did. And one of the first things you and I talked about was how we were so happy to find each other. And we talked about how in our earliest conversation, we talked about how much we love Superman and how, despite how popular the character is or how long-standing the character is, for both of us, we had not been in a lot of situations. And, you're in the comics industry. I worked at a comic shop. Often we were not hearing from other people like, oh, I love Superman.
Yeah,
Superman's
no,
my
I
favorite
would be
character.
made fun of for like Superman being my favorite character. I'd be like, oh, how could you like Superman? He sucks. He's boring. He's lame. I can't wrap my head around that. That's like, I feel like he needs to be brought up again to like the number one spot. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the things, connecting with so many people who share our love for the character has been really nice and like validating, where it's like, hey, it's not just us.
Yeah. Oh, and yeah, for the audience, like, thank you so much for everyone who's listened. Like, we really appreciate it. Like, I really appreciate it. Just as a guest, I'm just a humble guest here, but like, I appreciate it so much. And like, yes, please, like, if you love this show and you love Superman, you have any friends that you think that like comics and like have any tangential interest in Superman, like, please like send it their way, and like, hopefully they'll like what they hear,
That's the thing. I echo that. And I always appreciate when people share, and you're always so helpful on that front. And I appreciate it. And other audience members share on social media. That's great. Please, everyone, keep doing that. But to Ken's point, it's like, if there's one person in your life who, likes Superman and they might not know about this podcast, tell them. Or the next time you go to your comic shop, if you're talking with someone, you see they've got Superman in their stack, be like, hey, listen to Digging for Kryptonite. Because, that's the thing. A person here and there, and we continue to grow. So I know I've been expressing some thanks, but I just want to take a minute here and just say a few words, and then we still have a few other areas to cover here. We're not signing off yet, but I just want to say again to the audience generally, like I said, the enthusiasm, the feedback really helps fuel this. So it means the world to me. And people send me gifts. People send me gifts. I mean, behind me on the shelf here, there's a piece of artwork from Philtastic Phil Menza. Of me reading The Death of Superman. It's on the bookshelf.
Oh yeah. I was wondering. Yeah, I saw that. And I was wondering what that was like. Cause it from here, it looks almost like a really old drawing. I wasn't sure if that was something from like the 40s or something, but that's awesome.
Yeah. He just sent that to me for my birthday. I did an episode not too long ago with Superman cosplayer Daniel Sanchez, who, as we talked about, designed that early 90s fossil Superman watch. And I talked in the episode about how I had thrown out the phone booth packaging that it came in. Well, another listener, Lou Koza, who's an Adventures of Superman historian, sent me, and you can see it on the shelf down there, sent me the packaging.
That's so cool.
And people send me stuff a lot. It's not expected, but it's greatly appreciated, and it's a beautiful thing. So just thank you. And I've been talking about people who send stuff or write in or whatnot. There are the majority of people I've never heard from, right, and may never hear from, and that's totally fine too, right? Mm-hmm. I just appreciate you tuning in, and whatever part of your day, your routine, the podcast can serve. I appreciate it. If you want to reach out, please feel free. I do always love to hear from people, but I thank the audience generally. I thank our Patreon community specifically, patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. And I plug it in every episode, but in case you're like, what the hell is this thing he's always talking about? So it's this membership where you pay a fee depending on your tier, and that helps me create this podcast, and in return you get perks. So at our $1 level, we have bonus episodes, specifically the Digging for Justice DC movie rewatch podcast. At the $3 level, you get to listen to episodes early. At the $5 level, you get to submit a comment or a question that we talk about on air. The $10 level is a sponsorship package. So all those sponsor commercials you hear, that's where that comes from. We have a $25 tier where we do a special episode with you as the guest, and even a $75 tier where I offer podcast coaching. And we have people at every level. And what that has allowed me to do is it's paid for all of the equipment that I use. It pays for my Captivate.fm podcast hosting service fee so that we can actually get the podcast online and get it onto all of the platforms that people listen to it on. It pays for Ecamm, our video conferencing platform. It pays for my web hosting fees. And it allows me to be able to devote the amount of time that I do to this, because if this were costing me money, again, it's not that I wouldn't do it at all, but I don't know that I would be able to justify to myself or to my wife how much time I'm spending.
It's when it comes to creative things, like, everything does cost money. Unfortunately, it's, like podcasting, making movies, making comic books, drawing, like all of it takes a lot of time. Like it's very time consuming. So like it needs to generate some kind of revenue to like allow it to happen, because like you got to eat, right? You got to pay rent, you got to eat. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I thank all patrons past and present. And I've had people who have been patrons from the beginning. I started this in, I think, 2018. And then people who have left and come back, and I appreciate everyone. And as I've mentioned, there are different ways that you can join. You can be a monthly subscriber, you can be an annual subscriber, and you save 2 months. You can even do a free trial. So if you've never done it, please feel free to check it out. Do a free trial. If you do the annual subscription at the $1 level, it's $10 for the year. So
totally worth it. Like think about how much money you spend on like fast food or coffee or whatever. Like seriously, like if you like the content Anthony's putting out there, like there's more of it obviously if you get it, but like it definitely goes to supporting like, very hardworking creator here. So I please everyone, if you can, that'd be awesome.
No, I appreciate that. And again, the episodes we're doing there are a lot of fun. I mean, the DC movie rewatch podcast, we started with you. We did the Batman. We did the Green Lantern movie. Most recently, Phil Tastic and we did Catwoman. And,
I can't wait to hear that one.
That brings us back to Steel because, again, to further defend our position in the Steel movie, at least it was John Henry Irons. Like, it felt like John Henry Irons. They captured the core.
I mean, there's shots right out of Steel #1 that are in that movie, like straight up, like translated to film. Yeah.
Because you watch Catwoman and it's like, what am I watching? This does not feel in any way, shape, or form like the character.
Yeah.
So, anyway, so again, thank you, audience. Thank you, patrons. Again, the creators whose work we've discussed. And, last but far from least, the guests, yourself included. I mean, it's to a person, it's like every single person who has been on has just been rock solid in terms of reliability, preparation, and just enthusiasm for this. And, the fact that I think that's one of the other big thing that has kind of sustained my enthusiasm for this is, and this is, I think in part why I have rotating guests, because like everyone has a different amount of time they can commit to certain things. Like, again, I know, like I haven't asked you to do 100 or like a 50, issue run of something, because I know that with your drawing schedule, like it's tough to carve out.
Yeah. It was hard doing the one issue. I'm going to be honest. Like, I'm also a very slow reader. Like that we read that 100-page issue. That took me literally that took me like an hour and 40 minutes to read. Like, so I'm a very slow reader when it comes to comics. Yeah.
No, I understand. But I think that's the other thing that's really kind of sustained me in this is because like we're always bringing in, we have our kind of our roster of guests and people come in and out, but it's like, I try to pair people based on, what they're interested in and what they have a background in and again, what level of commitment they're able to make. And it's just, it's just always fun. Like I'm always excited when we sit down to record, but even if I weren't, or even if it's been a long day or whatever, once we get going, it's real fun.
Yeah, for sure, man. For sure. I want to shout out some of your guests too, like, cause you've got a great stable of roster, Jeremy that you did all the, the Super Friends stuff with, and the Superman animated show. Those are some great episodes. Like he's really fun to listen to. And Sean from Fat Moose is always great to hear. And Justin, man, like I met Justin DeVoe, who does like the best movie commentary with you ever. Like I think he's got to do all the DC movies with you because he's so like entertaining to listen to. But I met him at Comic-Con a few times now. And he's really cool guy, and it's like it's so cool to be able to meet people like through the podcast, It's very cool.
No, I echo all of that. Yeah, Justin will be on. We'll be talking the Flash movie.
I can't wait to hear that. Yeah.
We'll probably be throwing up the explicit tag for that. So just be on the lookout for that. That's coming. But I appreciate everyone who's been part of this. It really means a lot. So let me read a couple of reviews. Again, I won't go through all of them, but I just wanted to give a shout out to some folks who took the time to put pen to paper, so to speak, and submit these. So Glenn Clark, another one on Twitter, very supportive, very vocal, very active. Says best active weekly Superman podcast. Rotating co-hosts not only keep the podcast fresh, but also allow people with the passion for certain eras to really shine. If you like Superman, you should give this one a listen. Ollie says, I love the podcast. Anthony's a great podcaster. Definitely recommend it. Eric Noriega, who goes by Swag Daddy on, as he said, he's not the one who set that username. I think it was his son. But in any event, this gentleman I've never met. He lives in Texas, I believe. He has been with me since the beginning of my comic shop history. He's one of those day one patrons who has just been so supportive. And his review means a lot generally, but also because this kind of speaks to another idea here about kind of like who we're reaching. He says, I'm not a huge fan of Superman. I've enjoyed, many of his stories told across different, media and eras. This podcast has done a wonderful job of documenting these stories. It's been a true education on Superman and has opened new doors with respect to the character that I've greatly enjoyed exploring. Can't recommend this podcast enough, even for the casual Superman fan. And I've heard that in a couple of instances. So it's like, yes, I imagine the bulk of our audience, right, are people like us who love Superman. But if we're kind of knocking down some doors and, kind of opening up the character to people who, maybe are have less affinity, I love that.
That's very cool. Yeah.
So again, I want to read these all, but I at a certain point, it's like, I don't know if it becomes too self-indulgent. So maybe I'll stop it at that point, but I do genuinely appreciate everyone who has, those were our few most recent ones, but I really appreciate everyone. And I encourage everyone to leave a review, specifically on Apple Podcasts. I know Spotify, for example, you can rate, but there's not a review box, but on Apple Podcasts in particular. And maybe we'll read it on an upcoming episode. So I hope people will do that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for everyone. Cause engagement's like super important. So like, thank you so much for putting the reviews out there.
Yes, no, absolutely. So one of the things that always comes up, and we're talking off mic about this, but just kind of the idea of gaps in our Superman fandoms. Like when we did that first episode, we talked about that. Like what are the things that, in 85 years across time and media, there's a lot, like there's a lot out there, and there's a lot that we, hadn't explored yet. At this point for you, and I know obviously you've done some of the homework, right, for episodes that you've been on. I guess for ones that you haven't been on, you've heard our discussions, but you haven't actually. But what, at this point, do you consider the biggest gaps in your fandom, or the gaps that you are most interested in closing?
I mean, I would definitely love to go back to read all the Triangle era. Because that's like the era I grew up with. And like, that is definitely something that I'd be, all your coverage on it was so fun to listen to too. So that's something, when, day of days, when I get more time, it's some mythical time in the future when I have time to just do like a ton of reading, like I would love to go and read through all that for sure. That's probably the biggest one. And that's probably the biggest gaps too. The comics themselves are probably the biggest gaps because there's just so many of them, and from so many different eras. So, yeah, I mean, I never saw the Ruby Spears cartoon, but like, I don't really feel like a burning desire to go back to watch it, that, but yeah, I mean, I guess Superman and Lois right now, I want to keep going on that. Like I haven't watched past season 1. So that's probably next on my list of things that I want to kind of watch.
What about Krypton?
Don't really have an interest. It's if this was like 2000, I'd be all over it. But there's just so much superhero stuff out there right now that like, unless it like really speaks to me in some way, it's like just not for me, No, that makes sense.
I understand.
Not crapping on them or like the idea or anything. It's just there's just so much stuff out there that like it kind of gets shuttled down. Yeah. Have you seen Krypton yet?
No, that's one of, I mean, I have far fewer gaps in my fandom now than 100 episodes ago. That still remains one, but we'll be covering those 2 seasons in 2 of our final 2023 episodes. So we'll be getting there. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because at the beginning when I set out to do this and was originally mapping out episodes, I mean, I've essentially kept to this, but my feeling at the beginning was, you don't have to cover everything. Like just cover what you're interested in. But I guess what's happened is I've become interested in more. So I have done episodes on things like, we've touched on the radio show, for example, where I don't know that at the outset of this, I was chomping at the bit to cover it. But, you know, Superman Smashes the Klan, for example, right, came from that Clan of the Fiery Cross, you know, radio serial. And so that I was interested in that. And so, it, you know, it's gotten to this point now where, and maybe this is kind of going back to the comic shop piece of it, like that, the OCD completist mentality where I'm like, I've covered so much and I'm like, I could do it all, but there's so much. But I would say, and I mean, it's so crazy to me, right? Like we're doing this whole George Reeves podcast. When we did episode 1, I had only seen a couple episodes of Adventures of Superman, right? So that was a huge gap in the fandom that now has been mostly closed. I mean, I still haven't seen all of the color episodes, but we'll get there. You know, again, you know, watching the Kirk Allen serials for the first time, delving into the radio show, discovering that the Rupee Spears cartoon existed.
You know, what's funny? I went back and listened to like one of our very first episodes we ever did. I think it was the Doomsday Clock episode on My Comic Shop History. It was either And I remember bringing up the George Reeves show to you. And I listened back to this, like, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, but like, it was so funny to me because it really popped for me that like, I said to you, did you ever watch the George Reeves show? And your response was like, it was just very dismissive, like, I don't really care. Like, and I think it's so funny that cut to now and you're like, it's like one of the best things ever. And you've got a whole show about it. I just think it's a really cool 180 that you took.
That is, I got to go back and listen. Yeah. No, I mean, that's one of the things with this is, and I don't, you know, I don't want to make it sound like, oh, everything is so great, but that is one of my biggest takeaways from doing this is in virtually every instance, I've, you know, if there's something that I previously liked, I like it more now after going through this process. And then there are things that maybe didn't necessarily speak to me before that now I can appreciate their place in the fandom and why they exist in terms of their context. I mean, look, after everything we went through, going through that Nick Cage movie that didn't happen, you know, my perspective on Superman Returns changed a lot. And it's like, oh, okay, like now I understand this movie a lot more because you understand the production hell that they went through and why they ended up with that, for better or worse. And it's like, oh, okay, like it just, everything clicks a little bit more. Yeah.
I mean, that was good. The Nick Cage episode was really good.
Oh, yeah, I know. I forgot about that. That was a good one.
Yeah, I think it's funny because I think like when you started this show, like I could hear it basically when just as a fan and listener and just having conversations with you, like I think you had an idea in your head, like we all do, of what Superman is and what he should be and like what he means to you. And like every single fan has that, right? Like it's like who I see as Superman is different from who you see as Superman, who is different from like Rick sees as Superman, you know? And like it's just the nature of the beast. But I feel like I've listening to these episodes of you over these last 100 episodes, I feel like you've gotten to this point where you are open to sort of all interpretations of it. And as long as you can get into the headspace of this is who this is for, and at the same time understanding that this doesn't replace or negate the version that I like. And so that kind of opens up your sort of acceptance to all different takes and versions. And I think a lot of fans should be open to that kind of mentality because time goes on, right? And if the version of Superman that you like is the one right now that's being published right now at DC, the version right now, 10 years from now, it's not going to be that. And you have two options. You can be mad about it, or you can stick with the thing that you like and not be mad about, just like anchor to what you like and just that's it. Or you can be open to experiencing new things, you know? And so, and you can always hang on to the version that is yours, but you can also be like, oh, well, I like, you know, this version too. Like the George Reeves show versus Zack Snyder's Superman are two very different versions of the character, but you can appreciate both and like both for what they are, you know?
Beautifully said. I think that open-mindedness is something that I have cultivated over doing this. And, you know, it's in terms of like what I hear from people directly, I feel like, because again, look, you go online and you never know what you're going to get, but I love the audience that we have. And I feel like it has like the discussions online, you know, have been respectful. And it's like, we do acknowledge that people come from this. And that's the thing, like any project you go into, you're bringing your own baggage, your own expectations. Yeah. I think one of the things that has helped me become more open to everything is just you can see the bigger picture and see where it fits into place. I think a test is going to be this new James Gunn movie, because hopefully when they announce the casting and when we start to see photos and trailers and stuff, hopefully it looks great and I'm excited for it and it ends up being what I want it to be. But if it's not, I mean, we're recording this right in spring 2023, 10 years since Man of Steel. Now,
yeah, which is crazy. That's so crazy. I can remember like the day I saw that movie, I can remember it so clearly in my mind.
Same. And obviously we've talked at length about how we enjoyed that take and enjoyed Henry Cavill, but I realized, right, like for those who didn't like that, it's been a decade without a different big screen Superman. Thankfully, we have Tyler Hoechlin on TV. But so there is this part of me that's like, well, if I don't like what the James Gunn cinematic universe ends up becoming, that could potentially, I don't know, this could be 5 years, 10 years. I mean, who knows where I'm locked into this, and I don't know how I'll react.
But do you think you've gotten to this point now where even if it's not your favorite, you can still appreciate it for what it is?
I far more now than before, but like I said, I think this is a little bit of a test because this will be, since starting the podcast, essentially, I mean, this is kind of like the first real instance where it's something, I mean, except Superman and Lois is another example, but where I can't see the full picture yet of what its place is going to be. So,
well, I mean, you've come around on Superman Returns, which is something I've not been able to do. Like that's an instance where that movie, I loved it when I first saw it. And every time I've watched it since, and granted, I haven't watched it in probably like 15 years. So like, it's been a long time since I've watched it, but like I watched it probably about 5 or 6 times total. And like each time I watched it was like, oh, this isn't very good. And it got worse and worse each time. So like, I would be interested to go back. I mean, I kind of don't really want to though. Like, I don't really want to go back and watch it, but like at the same time, I'd be curious to see like how, with my sort of now view from the top of the mountain, looking down at everything, as opposed to just being, this isn't mine. This is, you know what I mean? Like I feel like you're at that point where you're at the top of the mountain, you can see everything and not just your myopic little like tree, which I think like a lot of I think it'll make you happier as a fan if you can get to that place where you can be like, it's all valid, it's all cool. And if it doesn't work for me, it's working for someone else, but I still have the version that did work for me,
I hope so.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, like, say worst case scenario, say this is like the worst version of Superman that you've ever experienced. Like, you still have Henry Cavill, like it's just, yeah.
You know what? Here's the other X factor. Having this podcast as an outlet, because even if I don't like it, we'll have fun talking about it.
True. That's true. Yeah. I mean, I'm excited for what he's going to do. Cause like you said, it's been 10 years since a solo Superman movie, which historically isn't that long, but like in this era that we live in now with superhero movies, it's pretty long time, to not have a Superman. Like, I mean, we've had, since that movie came out, we're on our third Batman? No, second Batman. Third Batman. Yeah. Christian Bale to Ben Affleck to,
yeah, but Dark Knight Rises. Oh, it was right before. I think it was 2012. And then you're right.
So I mean, in theory, when that movie came out, I remember I thought that it was part of the Dark Knight universe because it was Christopher Nolan. Like me and my friends thought that Christian Bale, like, because the Wayne satellite is seen in Man of Steel, and it's like the logo is very similar to the one for the Wayne tech in the Nolan movie. So yeah, I would say technically it's been 3 Batmans since that movie. And like, that's pretty nuts, So 3 Spider-Mans, or no, two Spider-Mans, but still more than one Spider-Man, yeah, I'm excited to see what it is. I hope it's really good. I hope it's the best version of Superman we've ever had. I mean, Christopher Reeve is a high bar to jump, but I don't know. What are your expectations for it? What are you hoping for?
I don't know.
Do you have any casting that you want? Is there someone that you think would be a great Superman?
There's not, I don't even know the actor's name, but he was on the 2nd season of White Lotus on HBO, which my wife and I watched, and his name has been thrown about as like fans have been suggesting him, and I could see it. I think I got the general look.
Okay.
There's no one who immediately comes to mind. I mean, I know they're aiming younger, and I mean, I would go for someone who's, even if not like totally unknown, but lesser known, right? Mm-hmm. For all the reasons that are typically,
you don't want Tom Cruise being Superman because he's just too famous. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say this, because I don't want to sound overly skeptical unnecessarily. I mean, I think in terms of what Gunn has said, right? The idea that it's going to be early days, I think he said focusing on him as a reporter, or that might just be my own projection, but I hope it does.
But not an origin story.
Not a full-on origin story.
I love that.
Yeah, I agree with that. And look, when Gunn announced that he was directing and all of that, he talked about, you know, how the movie's coming out on his father's birthday and he lost his father, and, you know, sort of, I guess we probably have a sense of what Clark's backstory is going to be in this, if, you know, depending on how much inspiration, you know, Gunn draws from what he's gone through. I don't know. But, I mean, in terms of what little has been said, I mean, it certainly seems like, you know, this could work out great. I mean, I don't know. And I've enjoyed the Guardians movies. So it's not like I've looked at his other work and I've been like, oh my God, if he does something like this with Superman, it won't work. You know, I've enjoyed those other movies. I think it'll have a great soundtrack. I think it'll lean more into the humor.
Be cool. I hope they use like real music, like real like musical artist bands and stuff like they do in Guardians of the Galaxy, because like I love that. I know that's kind of hot debates. I know some people like the more orchestral sort of cinematic stuff. I think they're both good. Like but I really like the use of real world music in movies and stuff. So if he brings that in, I'll be down with that.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, not to speak for you, but I think for both of us and probably a lot of fans, it's like, again, it just has been so long since a solo Superman movie. It's like, I want this fresh. You know what? I guess most of my frustration with all of this, and we did a whole Patreon episode on it, where I think most of my frustration is just this, again, sort of quasi reboot / continuation of what's come before. I really think, you know, for Superman, it seems like we're getting a reboot, but for the cinematic universe overall,
well, are they recasting everybody? Did I hear that? Because I've heard from some of my friends that they're like just hard rebooting everything, like new Batman, new everyone.
No, that's what they should be doing, but it's all very nebulous at this point, where, you know, Gunn has basically left the door open. I think a lot of this is going to hinge on how well these remaining movies perform. I mean, based on what Shazam 2 did at the box office, I feel like that's probably it, but I don't know. Zachary Levi seems to be pals with Peter Safran, who's co-running DC Studios with Gunn. So, you know, maybe Levi's Shazam will continue. Jason Momoa seems to think he's playing Aquaman and Lobo.
Wait, really?
He's there. I think they've reined him in a little bit, but he's, you know, talked about being open to at least playing multiple characters. And I guess Lobo is a favorite of his. A lot of the responses have sort of been like,
he'd be a good Lobo. Like, I mean, I think it'd be weird for him to like jump, but Lobo, like there's so many prosthetics and stuff that you need. Like he wouldn't really look like Jason Momoa, you know, he'd have like the white skin with the black eye things and stuff. So
yeah, I mean, look,
Justin DeVoe should play Lobo. Like, I mean, what the heck? Like,
I agree. I think
he looks just like him. He's ripped. Like every time I see him at Comic-Con, I'm like, damn, dude, make me want to like, I feel like bad about my fitness, you know?
I know it's very inspiring. So
like if they're hard, did you ever watch The Outer Banks?
No.
Oh, it's a pretty good show on Netflix, but there's one actor on there. If they ever did reboot everyone, I think he'd be a great Flash. I think the Flash, the reboot, if there's going to be a reboot for Flash, I think the actor is on The Outer Banks.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
What do you know his name?
The character he plays is JJ. I don't know the actor's real name.
All right, we'll look him up. But yeah, so I mean, right now it's been very nebulous, and I think I suspect it's because Gunn is planning to keep some of his people, a la folks from The Suicide Squad and Peacemaker,
okay,
as well as just kind of keeping the door open. You know, if this Flash movie makes $1 billion, unlikely as that might be, but like if this Flash movie is off the charts, it's like, oh, well, then maybe Ezra Miller does stick around. You know, Gal Gadot, that seems to remain a really open question, and there's no Wonder Woman 3 currently, you know, moving forward. So I don't know. But again, my hope and my hope was, and my preference would be that it was just a full-on reboot, like just start completely from scratch. I think this hodgepodge is just setting themselves up for fans' frustration and everything.
Yeah.
Like, I just don't think this is the way to go. But.
Yeah, like it's because narratively it seems so obvious that that's what they should do, right? Like from like a creative end, but like financially, I could see why they're like, you know, like so much money has been invested into like Black Adam and Shazam and Blue Beetle and Flash that like I understand why there would be the hesitancy to like want to do that, like because you know there's a lot like for us we think these studios have like unlimited amount of money, but you know it's they don't, you know, they actually do need to make money and turn profits, and a lot of the money that to make these movies is borrowed money that needs to be paid back. So they like you know a string of flops could bankrupt a production house or a studio. So like you know there's always that to consider. Like as fans, we always think like, oh, this is what they should do, you know? And like I agree with you creatively, narratively, it should just be like a hard reboot for sure.
At the same time, I guess this is all to say that I think a lot of the frustrations that I have, or a lot of the mixed feelings, or, you know, I think a lot of it has to do more with just the state of the cinematic universe and like the direction from a business sense than how I feel about the Superman movie specifically, right?
Mhm.
Again, I think there's so little that we know about it, but from what we do know, I mean, it sounds promising enough. I really do like the idea of not doing the origin again because we've gotten that, but showing the early days and showing, focusing on the reporter side and all of that. So again, I think in terms of the Superman movie in and of itself, I'm fairly optimistic. I guess I'm more conflicted just about the overall plan and direction.
Well, how would you feel if it was like the Batman, where it's like the Superman movie is just like, it's only Superman. It's Superman's the only character in this world, and it's like these 3 movies are just Superman, that's it. Like, how'd you feel?
Oh, that would be fine.
Yeah, I'd be fine. Like, I get the idea of like wanting the characters to come together and have this cinematic universe, but at the same time, the Batman was so good that like, and the Christopher Nolan movies were so good that like, part of me is like, I don't know. Like, I feel like I'd be okay with like Superman having his own movies and Flash having his own movies and Green Lantern having his own movies. And maybe if, down the line, they want to all bring those actors together for Justice League, that would be cool. But like, as a fan at this point, I don't need these movies, every one of them, to interconnect with each other. I actually think that's one of the reasons I've kind of fallen out of the Marvel stuff, because like they're so interconnected and they feel so much like a television show that like they don't really feel unique to the characters anymore. And they all feel so like the same, like visually, like they all look the same. The costumes all look the same. Like, and so having them in their own worlds, like, might allow for that differentiation. I don't know.
No, I'm with you. I think you and I are probably in the minority in terms of not wanting that shared universe. I'm sure there are others out there, but no, I'm with you. Here's the thing. If we had seen DC do it really well on the big screen, then I would be like, oh, okay. It's like, this just has not, for all the reasons that have been discussed, it's like this has never really come together. And part of me feels like if that's the aim and it's just kind of gumming up the works, it's like, just focus on, again, like the Batman, like just focus on making each corner as strong as possible.
I mean, it's not just DC. Remember the monster universe they're trying to make, the Godzilla universe?
I remember.
And the Universal model, like the Frankenstein, Wolfman stuff, like, I feel like everyone, because of Marvel's success, was trying to do that. And I think everyone's realizing this is really hard. Like, and I don't know. And even the most recent Marvel stuff, I haven't been like super jiving with, like I haven't seen any of the Disney Plus shows because they just haven't like spoken to me like what they look like, and I don't know.
Yeah. I haven't seen Thor, Love and Thunder, Multiverse of Madness, Wakanda Forever.
I haven't seen any of them. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm behind, but in any event, we'll see. I actually, as I said, I've, mapped this out, and I think that, no joke, we'll see how things shift, but assuming Superman Legacy keeps its July 2025 release date, it will probably be coming out like right as we're going to be hitting episode 200. So,
nice.
So
dude,
maybe in a couple of years, we'll be here. We'll be talking about it, and hopefully it's a really positive conversation.
Yeah.
But either way, it'll be fun to talk about. So I know that Steelworks miniseries, Superboy Man of Tomorrow. I know you're looking forward to catching up on Superman and Lois. We're maybe fair to say cautiously optimistic about Superman Legacy. Like, we're open minded. We'll see where it goes. What else are you?
Oh, I'm optimistic about the movie. I'm super optimistic about it. Like, I'm like, until like if something comes out and it looks terrible, then like I'll probably won't be as optimistic. But like right now, I'm psyched.
All right.
Yeah.
So I'm more cautious, but you're What is there anything else that you're just kind of excited about Superman wise at the moment?
I mean, I think you kind of like hit everything. Yeah, I mean, you covered comics, covered the shows, covered the movie. Like, is there anything else besides like the toys, I guess, the action figures, which we've got, like, for everyone who sends Anthony stuff, he's got a very nice setup here that I'm not sure you can see it, but he's got like a very like museum-esque layout. So anything that you send him is got a very nice spot. It's got a very, very cool.
Yeah, I went with these open shelves, and I can get everything on here, and I can see them. And I'm not fishing for more gifts, but I'm just saying, to Ken's point, if you do send something, there's a spot for it. The current comics have been really good.
Yeah, I'm so far behind in comics. Are you talking about the new or the Jonathan Kent? Josh Williamson on Superman. I haven't read yet the Tom Taylor Adventures of Superman John Kent series. I read Son of Kal-El, but now there's a new miniseries where he has the electric powers and stuff. I haven't read that yet. The Joshua Williams, the new #1 that came out already, right? Yeah, because the art looked really great in that. And Josh Williamson's a great writer, so I was really excited about that.
And then what Philip Kennedy Johnson's been doing on action. I think the current titles are in a good spot right now. But yeah, actually, I wanted to ask you, especially as an artist. So Superman #1 by Josh Williamson, and I'm blanking on the artist, Jamal Campbell, maybe. I want to say, I apologize if I've mixing up.
I'm not sure because I haven't read it. So I just saw the preview pages and I was like, really, I thought it was striking art. Yeah.
So our mutual friend, Sean Hendricks from Fat Moose Comics, he gave me a copy of issue number 1 when it came out, which was great. So a print copy.
Nice.
And I read it and I enjoyed it. But I'm looking at this is not about the art itself, but just about the paper quality and the presentation. I'm like, oh, like, you know, it looks okay. Cause now I've been reading so much digitally, right? And now in the time since it's popped up on DC Universe Ultra. And so I'm looking at those pages on the iPad and it just it's just so much more stunning. It just pops. I don't know if it's just a paper quality thing or what, but I don't feel like, and I'm curious.
I think it's a coloring thing. Cause like all colorists color digitally. And so the purest version of what they're coloring is on the computer.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So when it's printed, you know, the printer levels or whatever could be off. I know like Andrew has talked about me about that. Like he's like would complain that sometimes things print too dark or too muddy, you know?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Cause I was really just chalking it up to the paper quality. Maybe that has something to do with it,
it's the paper quality combined with, I think the printer settings is what gets the muddy kind of look.
And maybe I'm more sensitive to this because of our friendship and knowing, you know, being more dialed into the art, because again, especially comparing that, I'm like, man, and I'm not trying to talk people out of buying the print book, but it was just that I don't feel like it did the art because it's gorgeous art. And I'm looking at it on the iPad page. I'm like, oh man, like this just jumps out in a way that it didn't. In any event, the books right now I think are really good. I think I'm excited about that. Superman and Lois has been amazing. We'll see about the new movie. And then, you know, just kind of looking back at everything. And
did you read the Philip Kennedy Johnson one where he's like War World?
Yes.
Yeah, that looked really cool. That design looked cool. And like I actually knew Philip years ago. Like I met him at a creator connect thing in New York Comic Con like 2012. So that was like when he popped on that, I was like, oh, this is like cool to see. Like, you know, yeah, it was pretty cool.
I know it's been really good. And again, as far as
sorry to go back to that, but I love that idea though. Like that's what I was talking about. Like that's like a new take for Superman, right? Where he's like fighting in a barbarian world. That's and it's action based. Like that's kind of what I was talking about before, of like adding to the legacy, not just retreading stuff that's already been done, you know?
Yeah, it was a great story. And it was really this, I kept coming back to the word spiritual, but like, it was really this, like he was trying to inspire the people, subjugated people to fight. It was, again, talking about different kinds of challenges, but the physical component was there. But you also had this, he's separated from his home and his family. He's trying to, you know, inspire these people. It was really good. And then as far as, you know, remaining gaps, it's like at this point, again, the Krypton TV show, that's something relatively recent. We'll be filling that gap in. You know, the Crisis Till Death period, right? That had been a really big gap in my comics reading, and we closed that. And I mean, essentially now, for the most part, I've read the entire modern era of Superman from Crisis forward. The new Krypton stuff that Jeff Johns set up, and then he left, but the other writers carried it forward. I've not gone through all of that, but we'll be hitting that at the end of this year as well. So
that,
I know I'm a little, but
yeah. I was so excited for that. That's when I was at my peak of comic book buying and reading, when I was like going to the store every week, going into Midtown Comics every week. That was during when I was in college, and or maybe right after college, like in that range somewhere. And like, I just remember being so excited for that. And then Superman's like not in like most of it. Like that's like the disappointing part, is that it's like Nightwing and Flamebird, and not Dick Grayson Nightwing, like John Kent. Not his son, John Kent. Chris Kent. Yeah. I think that's who Nightwing is. But
yeah, that Johns and Donner had introduced in their last son art. I gotcha. Yeah. But so essentially, like now I've read the entire modern era, the pre-Crisis, to your point about the comics, it's like I've only scratched the surface, right? I mean, I've read a selection from each era, and I've read a lot of the key stories, but there's just, you're talking almost 50 years of issues.
I feel like that's also like, that's a lot to go. That's a lot to ask you to read like Silver Age Superman, because it's like it's not meant for adults to read, like straight up. It's like it's meant for like 10-year-olds in 1960 like one or whatever. You know what I mean? And like that's, I feel like there's very little you're gonna glean from those books. You know.
At the same time, I think that was one of the things that for the pre-Crisis reading that I did do, I went in definitely with the mindset of like, hey, this is an interesting relic. It has historical significance. I'm probably not going to enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, for the most part, I really did enjoy them. You know,
Really, like
Yeah.
him getting his head turned into a lion and stuff like that. Like,
I
that
mean,
was,
I didn't do that one. I mean, that's the thing. I think a lot of I think I did try to curate, some of the
Okay.
best of the era, so that might have
Gotcha.
skewed my perspective. And certainly the sensibilities are different, no
Mhm.
doubt. And yes, meant for a younger audience, and they could be clunky and they can be hokey. But again, I really thought this was going to be more of an academic exercise. Like, hey, you're not really going to enjoy this, but you just kind of want to see where these things come from. But I found myself enjoying them more than I thought. So I think definitely mining more of the pre-crisis era is in the cards. And then the radio show, I mean, that still remains, thousands of those episodes, and I've only listened to a few. I don't know how much I'll end up doing, but that's still a gap. The old newspaper strips, I mean, I barely, looked at any of those.
Yeah.
But again, it's as we've moved forward here, there's far less left that that I've not dug into. So
Cool.
it's been a ton of fun. So one of the newest things that we looked at was this Man and Superman
yeah.
story, Marv Wolfman, Claudio Castellini. So Wolfman talked about this. I don't know if this was included in that 100-page spectacular, but they subsequently did a deluxe edition, and I read that one on DC Universe Ultra, and Wolfman wrote a whole introduction, and then there was all this supplementary material too. But essentially, this was going to be a 4-part arc in Superman Confidential. Do you remember that ongoing
I do.
series?
That's the one that Tim Sale and
Yes.
Darwin Cook did, right?
Yeah, they did
Yeah.
that initial arc on Kryptonite, and
Yeah.
the whole gist of that series was that it's story set in the early days of Superman.
Okay, because I actually really loved that. I think it was Tim Sale who did Drew It, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I loved that arc. Yeah, I was so excited. I was thinking like it was the #1 issue, was gonna be worth a ton of money. I was like, this is gonna be my series on, and then they just kind of like went away, and I was like, bummer.
Yeah, I mean, I think it only made it to issue, 15 or something like that. Like, it just didn't last. And it was rotating creative teams,
Yeah.
but after that initial arc, I don't know, and not, this is not a knock on the creators who followed, but I mean, Darwin Cook and Tim Sale, like those are two,
Yeah.
heavy hitters, and I just, for whatever reason, it didn't seem to, to really sustain. But in any event, this was going to be 4 issues of that, but then the series got canceled, and this thing just got put on the shelf for years.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally DC wanted to, dust it off, and they put it out in this special, and then later in a deluxe edition hardcover. But, as we were saying, it's Clark's early days. He's just moved to Metropolis. He has the costume in his suitcase, but he hasn't become Superman yet.
Mm-hmm.
And he's trying to get a job at the Daily Planet. It's very hard to get his foot in the door. He, like we said, he takes this job as a janitor. He first meets Lois Lane. We have terrorists who are targeting Metropolis and demanding, billions of dollars, and the mayor is imposing martial law. And we have a DA election going on in the background, and all of this. This was the first time I had read it. I had heard great things about it when it came out a couple of years ago, but I hadn't read it. It was the first time for you too.
Yeah. It was interesting. I mean, I do think that, like I said, the art, Claudio Castellini, you said was the artist.
Mm-hmm.
The art, he was clearly working his like butt off drawing this. Like, there's so much background. There's so much crowd shots. There's like a real focus. It's like not really like, I mean, he never wears the costume, which was kind of a bummer a little bit, but like so much of the focus is the city itself. And like there's double page spreads of like the city, and like, that's like days of work, So like, I could tell he was just working his like butt off drawing this, but yeah, like I was a little disappointed they never wore the costume, and like I was a little confused as to time period too, like because like it felt like it was supposed to be modern, but then like he's using a typewriter, like a straight up typewriter. Like there was things like that where like that was like this weird jump for me, and then the inclusion of Lex Luthor I thought was a little disappointing. Like I thought that like once he showed up, I was like, oh, I know exactly where this is going. He's staging like, and it felt like a retread of Birthright in a lot of ways. Like the macro story felt like a retread of Birthright, which is also in the cartoon show. Like it was a story that like Lex Luthor stages like a terrorist attack so that he can be the one to save it. Like I just felt like that was a very like, but the story of him getting a job at the Daily Planet I thought was very interesting, because that's something we always talked about, is like, how does he do this? This is like a very difficult thing to do. And like, I like that it showed that it was hard for him to get a job at the Daily Planet. It wasn't just like, you got gumption, kid, I'll hire you. Like it was like actually like he was working as a janitor, and then he, and he's like trying to like get credit as a writer. Like I thought all that stuff was awesome,
No, I'm with you. That was the best part. I think you and I probably had the same reaction when Lex showed up, and it's just like, oh, okay. Because as we're reading this, right, there are these flying machines that are causing destruction in Metropolis, and these messages: the city's being extorted for $5 billion. Or these attacks will continue. There are these bombings.
It had a Golden Age feel to it a little bit, where like he wasn't dealing with supervillains, right? And then once Lex shows up, it's like, oh, okay, yeah.
Yes, and as it's going along, it held my interest because I said, oh, okay, what is the payoff going to be here? Who is going to be behind this? And I mean, I guess I should have assumed Lex, but I thought like, okay, maybe we're going a different direction here. And then Lex shows up and exactly like you, it's like, oh, okay.
So they do this whole setup where like Perry has Lois going to the airport and everyone's like, oh, I can't believe it's him. Well, it's been 10 years since he's been here. And at first I thought, oh shit, they're bringing Bruce Wayne into this because they said Lois dated this guy. Like and I was like, I genuinely thought it was going to be Bruce Wayne and they were going to somehow like tie him into it and like be this antagonistic sort of like, and then it was Lex. And I was like, and then from there, I knew exactly where the story was going. And I was like, okay.
I had very similar experience because I was thinking the same thing because as you're reading it, Lex is obvious. Lex is so obvious that you figure, well, they wouldn't do that, right?
Yeah.
So much of any story, right? And I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but it's about reversing the audience's expectations, right? So you have all this buildup about everyone a buzz. Who's it going to be? He's coming back. It's been 10 years. So it's like, yeah, of course you assume it's going to be Lex. So, well, okay, how do you reverse the audience's expectation? Bruce Wayne, I think, would fit in perfectly there, right?
Yeah.
Because he too has this, journey around the world and everything. And it's like, oh, okay, like this will be the twist. And then it's just exactly what you thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And even factoring in that the story was written over 10 years ago, even then, I mean, it was it would have been obvious. So yeah, that was kind of curious to me. It didn't ruin the story. I think overall, just the theme and just the setting of Clark overwhelmed by this big city, I think that works. I think, some of what's kind of layered around it, I don't know how much you get out of it.
I did kind of like they never wore the like part of me was like, if I was buying this back in 2008 when I was in college and money was tight and he never wore the costume, I probably would have been a little disappointed. But I did like that it was a story with him not in the costume. Caveat though, like, because he has this interim costume before he becomes Superman, like very, very akin to like the red jacket of Smallville, like the same idea, but it's not. Like at first it's like he's just like a long sleeve black t-shirt and jeans, and that's like his stealth suit, and that's like whatever, that's fine. And then at one point he puts like a bandana around his face, that's kind of cool too. But then the weirdest choice, which I thought was, and this proceeds for like the second two chapters, is when he does his super activities, he's wearing his Clark Kent like suit, like his 3-piece suit, the tie and everything, but he puts a stocking over his head, like he looks like a serial killer. Like it's very weird. I'm just like, why? What? Like, what was the thinking behind that? Yeah,
that took me out of it too.
Yeah,
I don't know. That was kind of odd. I guess I also.
Like he literally looks like a bank robber because he's wearing like the tie with like the stocking. Like it looked like from Point Break. Like the bank robbers. It was just so weird. But.
At one point, it looked like a plastic bag over his head. It was a little odd. And also, I guess if it had really leaned more into him investigating as a journalist, but a lot of it is just him using his super hearing. He eavesdrops on Lex. He eavesdrops on Lex, and then he goes to Lois and he like fills her in on all this stuff. And it's like, all right, I mean.
Well, let me ask you this, okay? Because I had this realization reading this story is that I don't like Superman having omnipotent hearing and omnipotent X-ray vision. I really don't. I think those are powers that like he doesn't need because he's a Swiss Army knife of powers, right? And like I love how Smallville handled the X-ray vision, where it was like an X-ray that he was like literally seeing like in front of him. Like in this, he's like seeing miles. Like he's in Metropolis watching Pete and Lana at a dance. It's like, what? Like and then like the hearing when like, he's hearing everyone, like I feel like it makes him too godlike. And I don't like that. Like for me, like in my heart of hearts, if I was creating the version of Superman that for me is like his super hearing is something that he has to like really like use like a muscle kind of like, you know what I mean? Like he has to like, it's not just like going all the time. And same thing with the X-ray vision. Like it should be like hard for him to use it. Not like,
I get that. It's weird because even just using Superman and Lois as just a very recent example, that show, as much as it's primarily set in Smallville and we get a lot in Metropolis, there's really kind of like a global aspect to it where, he'll hear of a disaster right on the other side of the world and he'll go off. And I guess we've grown accustomed to that. And it's the sort of thing where it just sort of, he's trained himself to the point where he's able to hear everything and he can tune it out, but certain, disturbances in the, the wavelengths or whatever get his attention. But I agree. I like the idea of kind of scaling that down a little
Way
bit.
down, yeah.
You know, Superman the Animated Series or
Perfect.
Adventures of Superman. It's like a more, he's still got a ton of power. It's just
Yeah.
a little more modest power
Yeah,
set.
and like people might not like this either, but like I actually don't like Superman as like a global character. Like I don't like the fact that he can hear like a wire snap halfway across the world, and like he like to me that makes him, I don't want to say less relatable, but it makes his struggles less like honestly, the fact where people say he's unrelatable, I think has less to do with him being strong and more with this like omnipotent like ability that he has, right? Like to like hear and see and everything that's happening all at once. Like I feel like that's like a level of craziness of like ability that like I don't think he needs. Like I think that is one of the reasons it's so hard to write Superman stories. Like if you just pulled him back just like into he's strong and he can fly and he can shoot lasers out of his eyes, like I think that's enough, you know?
Yeah, no, I hear you. I do hear you with that. But yeah, the whole, proto costume that he's using and his use of powers. There's some stuff that I think was a nice touch, like when he's investigating the bombing of the courthouse and he's, handling one of the, devices, and then he, throws it over to the police, then he realizes his fingerprints are on it.
That was cool, yeah.
He's like, oh man, like I really messed up. Like, it shows those early failings and things like that. And even just showing up at the apartment that, he had read the description of, online. And of course it's much worse than advertised. And he's stuck in this, dump essentially.
So I didn't realize this book was from 10 years ago. I thought this was written now. So that's my fault. But like, there's this whole sequence at the beginning where he's like going around asking people where this address is, and everyone's kind of like brushing him off. And in my head as a New Yorker, I'm like, dude, why do you think anybody's going to tell you that? Like if someone comes up to like, I don't know, like, I feel like that's like, just Google it. Like this isn't like rocket science. You don't need some like lady trying to get you to sign up for like the what was it, like environmental or water supply or something like there's someone or a voting thing. Voting. Yeah. There's a lady asking him to sign up to register to vote. And he's like, well, I don't live here yet, but do you think you could tell me? And she like starts to just ignores him. It's like, yeah, that's what people do in the city. Like, I'm sorry, dude. Like, I don't know what, like, I thought that was a little over the top. It's like, they're going out of their way to make him look like a bumpkin. And it's like, don't love that.
It was maybe a little bit of a heavy touch on that, but I didn't mind that because, again, it definitely shows he's this fish out of water, and it's just wildly different from the small town he comes from, right? Where anyone would happily, give him directions.
Is that true though? Is that true? Like,
I don't know.
Like, I don't think it's true. I feel like if you went to a small town and were asking people like weird questions, like they'd be like, I feel like they'd be like a little apprehensive.
Well, it depends. If we're talking like Candace's dad on Superman and Lois, if you showed up, if I tell you to go take a hike. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe that is, maybe that's an assumption that we're all making. But again, the fact that no one will give him directions, he's hearing everything all the time in the city, and especially as they start to talk about him, right? Because now there are reports and photos of this flying man, this unidentified flying man, and all of that. I did like when but again, like I don't mean to dump on the story, but it's like we've seen shades of this before. Birthright is a good example where
Birthright's perfect, like how they handle this, I think,
because it's like, there's a lot of doubt about, a lot of people think he's part of this terrorist group, right? And Lois is the one who believes in him and stands up, to parry on this note and everything. And Clark's at a pretty low point and seemingly ready to kind of give it all, but he even ships the costume back to Smallville at a certain point. But Lois's belief in this flying man, that he's actually here to help, galvanizes him and encourages him to stick around. And so, I like that. At the same time, yeah, we've seen this before. I don't know how much new it really has to add on that front, but
like, that's a curious thing though with Lois. Cause like, why, like, because of the pains they went through in this particular story to try to be like real, why on earth would Lois think that he's like there to help? Like it's a level of like, we're just going to shoehorn this. Like, I don't know. Like it didn't track with the rest of it to me, like this level of realism. Well, I guess it's not really realism because he was using a typewriter. Like I don't know. Maybe that's a bad thought.
No, I guess I think two things maybe we can chalk this up to. One is that there is at least one instance where, the building is, because LexCorp, headquarters is destroyed at one
it's
point.
blown up. Yeah.
And like as beams are falling, he's trying to catch them, but people think he's destroying the building, and she's able to kind of recognize what's actually going on. So that's number one. But I think the other thing too, I think there's probably just this component of Lois, not that she's just a contrarian, but there's probably this part of her, like everyone is so quick to jump on this idea that this guy is up to no good. And maybe it's just like this natural skepticism. It's like, well, what if he's not? And I don't know, maybe if everyone in the city were quick to be like, oh, he's our savior, she would be the one to be like, well, we need to,
probably because that's what she is with Lex.
Yeah.
Like, right. So it's the flip with Lex where like everyone's like, yeah, Lex is the greatest. And she's like, no, he's not. Yeah.
So I think it's just that wanting to ask questions, not assume.
That's a good, okay. You know what? You switched me around. That's a good, it's a good explanation for sure.
Did you, as far as the designs of Lois and Lex and Clark, I guess in particular, I don't know,
they were all very classic looking to me. Like they felt, it makes sense that you said it was drawn 10 years ago now, because like it did feel very like old school. And even for then, to be honest, like it didn't really feel like modern, like, cause he must be an older artist. I'm not super familiar with him, so I'm not sure, but it felt very like Jose Garcia Lopez, like in that vein, it was very classic looking, like Neil Adams-ish.
I will say the only real thing that I guess I didn't love about this was, tell me what you think. I feel like Ma and Pa were a little bit
they're
too gung-ho about all of this and overbearing about him becoming Superman.
Yeah.
Right?
I did. Yeah. I thought that was definitely the part of it. Like, I mean, I'm so conditioned from Smallville that any sort of deviation from that to me doesn't ring true. Like the idea of like his dad, like pushing him into becoming Superman. And it's like, oh, we do what we do, Clark, like it'll be hard, but you know what? Them's the breaks, like, it's like, it doesn't really feel right to me. Like, I feel like John Schneider's version of Pa Kent is like, to me, that's it,
That's the thing. And look, we don't even have to get into the Kevin Costner take, which I know people are a lot more divided on, but a lot of people seem to be on board with, again, the Smallville version. And I agree with you. And that's always what I have in my head. And it's like, there's always this sort of this caution, right? That, they're instilling these values in him, but it's still all couched in terms of, we have to be careful. And this version, it just felt, and look, we were only getting glimpses, right? As Clark was remembering, but it just sort of felt like, Ma's making the costume and Pa's being like, oh, Clark, think of all the things you can do. You can irrigate, this dry land, blah, blah, blah. And it just...
And his mom's like, you got to keep your life separate so that you'll have time to rest. And Pa's like, he doesn't need that. Like, it's just, yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. It just felt like, and look, maybe there were more memories we just didn't see where Clark was generating a lot of this, but it just felt like from what we saw, it felt like they were really thrusting this on him. And yeah, it just felt like, I mean, number one, you want your character to be the one driving it, right? And so it took a little bit away from Clark, and it's also just, for me, and I think you as well, like just kind of an unwelcome departure from the typical dynamic where it's like, I want to help, what do I do? And like them helping him is fine, right?
Yeah.
She makes him the costume, they help him craft the character of Clark, but it seemed to be coming too much from them.
I think it was weird, and like they even bring it up in this book, that I think it's weird that his mom makes the Superman costume. I've never been on board with that. And I think it's like weird that like she comes up with a design and what it is weird. Like if you think about objectively, like you're putting your kid in the skin tight suit with the underwear on the outside, it's weird. Like, and like, I think Birthright did it the best, where it was like, she makes the costume, but she makes it based off of what Kryptonians are wearing that she sees in those pictures. So it's like this heritage. It's like a heritage kind of like, I'm embracing my culture and like wearing it now. Like, so like I'm trying to think of like a real world example of that. Like, some
kind of like tribal or something.
Yeah. Like Norway, like in Norway, people that wear the traditional Norway clothing for events, or like, what's another good example? Like in Japan, like people with like samurai garb and stuff, like stuff like that. Like, so it became like you bring your culture with you, and it becomes a representation of your Kryptonian culture. I think that makes so much more sense than to be like, oh, it's a romper suit, like it's weird. Like, why would he wear it? Why on earth would anybody wear that if it wasn't like a cultural, you know what I mean? Like in this day and age, you know?
It's funny. I just wrote, and I suspect it will be out by the time people hear this. I'm not positive, but it should be, for 13th Dimension to coincide with the 85th anniversary of Superman. I wrote an article building the perfect Superman origin, 13 questions for the reader. Because, you know, especially now having studied how the origin has evolved, there are all these little beats that we've seen different spins on over the years. And, you know, again, should Superman be born on Krypton or come via birthing matrix and be born on Earth, a la in the John Byrne revamp? Stuff like that. Who makes the costume? You know, is Lois in on the secret from the start, like in Man of Steel and Smallville, or is she duped? All that stuff. And one of them is, who makes the costume? And and again, ultimately the questions are posed to the reader, so I'll be curious where everyone lands. But it's like, there's a lot of charm, I think, in the whole, you know, thanks, my mom made it moment. But
yes,
realistically, it makes far more sense for all the reasons that you just laid out, that it would come from. And look, whether it's Superman, I mean, I guess the movies are the biggest example of this, with Superman the movie and Man of Steel. It's like it's bestowed to him.
It becomes like mythic, almost like Excalibur, kind of. You know, like it becomes this like I think it means something more if it comes from Krypton and it's bestowed to him, to me. Otherwise, it's just like this like colorful costume that your mom made for you. Like it's, which I do get the charm of it. Like, thanks so much. Like I do get that, but that also kind of infantilizes Superman a little bit. And like, I think that's like odd, you know?
No, fair enough. Was there anything else about Man and Superman that you either you liked or didn't work for you, or that you wanted to talk about?
I mean, I liked all the reporter stuff, all like seeing him get the job and being friends with the janitors and going to the baseball game and stuff. And like, I thought all that was fun. I thought like all the like little deeds he was doing for people, like, was cool. Like to see like getting the ball for the guy to give to his kid, and like knocking the passengers out of the way from getting hit by the bus, like using the super breath to push them out of the way. Like, I thought all that stuff was really cool.
Yeah, or even when he first gets to Metropolis and there's that card game on the street, right? Those hustlers and they're right, and he uses his X-ray vision and he gets the guy his money back. Yeah. I think overall, and look, this was again intended to be this 4-part story repackaged as this 100-page spectacular. I mean, I don't know that this rises to the level of, but I also don't think it was necessarily meant to be the kind of definitive origin story, a la, you know, Secret Origin or Birthright or Man of Steel or something like that. I think. And I think for what it aimed to do, really kind of exploring this angle of this farm boy in
like,
the big city feeling very overwhelmed, and how does he get the job? I think it works. I think it works nicely in that respect. And yeah, I mean, like he goes to a couple different newspapers, right? And one of them, you know, they're talking about the credits that he has, you know, writing about like, you know, mad cow disease for the Smallville Ledger or whatever. And, you know, they want him to rewrite it in a more, you know,
news it up,
grabby style.
Yeah.
And then even at the Daily Planet, right? Like he's trying to get in to see Perry White, and you know, the receptionist is like, you know, HR interviews. He's like, yeah, but I keep sending my resume. They send they don't have it, and he tries to get Perry's attention.
Oh my God, dude!
Him off.
I thought that was so relatable, trying to break into comics. Like I found that side of it's so relatable. Where it's like, well, I keep sending my stuff in, and they just keep losing it, and and then like you try to talk to someone that can actually make a difference. Like, I got no time for you, kid. You know what I mean? That's like the plight of every artist trying to break into comics.
Yeah, that felt true to life. And no, I know you and I talk about that all the time. So I really did appreciate that aspect of it. It's like getting a job at that caliber of a paper.
Yeah, I thought that was awesome to see that, like, because that was really fun. Yeah, I wish he had a couple shots in the suit at least. Like there was like not a single shot of him wearing the costume in this whole thing, which is kind of crazy that like they didn't do that even at the end, you know? Because even like Daredevil, the John Romita Jr. Frank Miller one, the origin story.
Oh, the Man Without Fear.
Man Without Fear, yeah. That's like famous for him never wearing the costume, except the last double page spread is like a double page spread of him in the suit. Like they could have done something like that at least, you know?
It's like even Smallville, though it was CGI and endlessly frustrating. It's like at least they showed you
the shirt rip. They did have that one point where the mom holds the costume up. She like holds it up, and Clark is standing behind it, so it looks like he's wearing. You see like his head with the S, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, actually one other thing that I did think was a cool touch was when Superman confronts Lex, and again you're only seeing it from Superman's POV.
That was kind of cool. Yeah.
That was cool, and this whole thing about like I'm gonna watch you 24/7. It was intense, and you think about, you know, what Lex's reaction to this would be, and how that would really further fuel the animosity between them, and just kind of how I mean, for lack of a better word, scary something like that would be, where someone with these abilities is going to just be constantly watching and listening.
Yeah. I like when he goes to shoot him with the gun and you see the bullets, like the casings, like bouncing off Superman. Like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. No, I'm really glad I read it. I hope you feel the same.
No, it was fun. Yeah, for sure.
It was, again, I had been meaning to read it for a while, and I thought it would help round out our discussion here.
When was it published? What year?
I want to say, it's funny because in my head, I'm like, oh, it was a couple years ago, but it probably was like 4 or 5 years ago at this point.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Let's see if we can pull this up. But yeah, I thought that this would kind of round out our discussion nicely, especially on this podcast where we talk so much about
how he gets the job being a reporter. Yeah. I thought that it was funny when I started reading it, I was like, oh my God, this is like what we talk about all the time. This is like the story that we've always needed. Yeah.
2019.
Okay. Yeah. So that was 4 years ago. Damn, dude. 2019 to me still feels like last year.
Yes.
Yeah. It's so crazy how fast time is going.
I know. It's crazy. So we've recently passed the 2-hour mark.
Oh my God. Talk about time going fast.
But I'm glad it didn't feel that way.
Yeah.
It's funny because at this point, we as you know, I mean, these episodes average this. I mean, it's almost never that we're under an hour and a half, and usually it's in between an hour and a half and 2 hours, and sometimes a little bit more. It's weird because I feel like if I wonder if I put out an hour-long episode, if it would like not feel like the podcast.
It feels short.
I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see. But kind of on that note, I want to give a couple of teases about what's to come. So after episode 100, we have 8 mostly standalone episodes. They're kind of thematically linked in certain respects, but it's not a huge event. So I had teased a few of these earlier, but coming up actually next week, we're going to talk about Superman Space Age by Mark Russell and Mike Allred. I'm really excited for that.
Very cool.
Other upcoming episodes, I mentioned Tom King, Up in the Sky and Woman of Tomorrow. That Stephen T. Siegel, It's a Bird, original graphic novel. Superman's Secret Identity, the Kurt Busiek, Stuart Immonen miniseries, which I have not gone back to in many years. So those 4, I think, form a nice quartet of these stories that we'll be taking a look at. After that, we have a couple of Mark Waid-centric episodes. We'll be looking at the first year of his current World's Finest book, and then we'll also be going back and looking at his JLA run. So I'm excited for that.
Oh, cool. JLA, yeah.
And, we were texting about this, but they finally announced the long-awaited follow-up to Birthright.
Okay, is it actually a sequel to Birthright? Because the article you sent me didn't mention Birthright at all.
It depends who you ask. So essentially, when I had Mark Waid on the podcast, now we recorded that in February 2021, and I can share now. He was like, he swore me to secrecy off mic, but he was like, we're going to do a sequel to Birthright. In one of those interviews, I think the one on Comics Beat that I had sent you, I can't remember, but with some interview, he talked about how, I don't know if he used this term specifically, but kind of like a spiritual follow-up. And like, if you know the story of Birthright, you kind of know this version of Clark and Lex.
Okay.
So I think it's kind of, in a spiritual sense, a follow-up, less so than literally Birthright 2.
Gotcha, okay.
But in any event, I'm very excited for that. And then a couple episodes after that, we'll be looking at the Fleischer cartoons because they're coming out on a brand new remastered Blu-ray.
Nice.
So we'll be talking about that. And then, of course, the Flash movie. And then after that, our big blockbuster summer event. Now, patrons know about this. I gave patrons an advance look at this. But Red Skies, our big multi-part look at all of the DC Crisis level events.
Oh, shit. So what crises are you?
All of them, baby. I mean, essentially all of them.
So you got Crisis on Infinite Earths, right? Then Identity Crisis?
0 Hour.
Oh, 0 Hour.
Yep. Identity Crisis.
Identity Crisis. Then Infinite Crisis.
Yep.
Flashpoint.
Final Crisis. Before
that.
Oh,
Final Crisis. I forgot about Final. Yeah, Final Crisis. Then Flashpoint. Then
the metal events.
Okay. Oh, the metal and heavy metal.
Death metal.
Oh, metal and death metal.
Yeah.
And then
Doomsday Clock.
So that's 10.
And
10.
Dark Crisis on Infinite Earths. The most recent
11.
one.
You got 11.
Yeah. And
wow, is that going to be 11 different episodes?
It's going to be all told. We're talking like 14, 15 because we'll hit 52. Which was the aftermath to Infinite Crisis. And
oh yeah, 50. Yeah. It's funny how the new 52 has sort of planted that in my head. When I say 52, I think new 52, but then I forget there was that series. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and even for Infinite Crisis, we'll have an episode that's kind of on all the build up to it, and then one on Infinite Crisis itself. So There's a lot.
Do you
This is
remember
gonna be a big
Countdown?
event.
It was the
Oh,
weekly
yeah.
series that went into Final Crisis. Do you remember that?
I thought you were talking about the Countdown special before Infinite Crisis. I do remember the weekly one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not fondly, it's sad to say, but I actually didn't read the whole. I didn't read the whole thing, so I don't really have much of an opinion on it.
Did you read Final Crisis?
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember liking it at the time, but being also very confused at the same time.
I did an episode on it a little while ago. We looked at Rock of Ages and Final Crisis.
Yeah, you were talking about that. The Morrison stuff. I remember listening to that. Yeah.
And I came around on Final Crisis a lot. I still don't love Superman Beyond or the final issue of Final Crisis. My preferred version of Final Crisis stops at issue 6 and doesn't have Superman Beyond in the middle. But as far as always kind of keeping an open mind and all of that, we'll see. I'm excited to go back. So, of course, we'll be looking in particular at Superman's role in all of these events. But, I was going to say I've read all of these events before. I mean, I haven't. I've never read any of the metal stuff, essentially. And I haven't read Dark Crisis. So a lot of this is new, but a lot of it I've read before. But it's been a long time for virtually all of these for me. And I've never read all of them together. Part of me is like, maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe you shouldn't, but it'll be fun.
Interesting experiment to go right through all of them. Have you ever read Christ on Infinite Earths? Because I never have.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I have read that. So that's our huge summer event that'll take us through, July and August and September. So Red Skies. So that's coming to Digging for Kryptonite really soon. I hope people will.
It's gonna be like 13 weeks straight of Crisis.
Yeah, it'll be a lot, but I'm excited. It's funny. Right on the table in front of us is the print copy of DEATHSHROUD #1.
Thank you so much for supporting, and held up for the camera here.
I have to say, there were at least a couple of people who reached out to me after we did. We did a little segment that we recorded and I put it at the top of one of the episodes where you talked about DEATHSHROUD and the Indiegogo campaign for issue #1. And there were at least a couple of people who reached out to me who were like, oh, thanks for letting us know. I'm going to go check it out. So hopefully they did, and they got their copy and all of that. As we're recording this, there's currently an Indiegogo campaign going on for issue 2.
Yep. So yeah, I just want to say thank you so much, one, for having me on to talk about it and to let everyone know about it. And thank you so much to all the listeners, and thank you for buying it, and supporting it. We appreciate that so much. And thank you to all the listeners who checked it out and supported it. We appreciate it so much. I appreciate it seriously from the bottom of my heart. Like, create your own comics, indie comics. It's a struggle to get the audience out there to know about it, just to see it and to be aware of it, So thank everyone for, seriously, means the world to me. If you've got any feedback, whatever, tweet me, Instagram me, I'm always posting about it. So love to hear any feedback. And yeah, thank you so much for the support. And please go check out the Indiegogo for issue 2. We're planning on, keep going with these. And then I'm also working on Vanish right now for Ryan Stegman. So I'm doing issue 7 and 8 of that. And so I believe the pre-order's up for it. I'm literally starting issue 8 yesterday. I started issue 8 yesterday. So that'll be awesome. And then later in the summer, there's another creator-owned project that I've been working on for a few years now with a writing partner of mine. And I think this summer is what we're eyeing for the release of it. So that should be very, very interesting. It's going to be different from everything else that we've worked on. So that should be really fun. And so just, follow me on the socials and keep your ear out for that. Cause I think, especially if you're a listener of this podcast and you like the ideas of superheroes and nobility and altruism and those kind of themes, you'll definitely like what, this project is about. So, thank you for the support on everything. And Anthony, thank you for always helping and getting the word out for all this stuff.
No, my pleasure. I hope everyone will check that out. And we'll put the link to the Indiegogo campaign in the show notes so people can click on that.
Thank you so much. And thank you again for everyone who checks it out and for the support. Thank you so much.
Well, Ken, I thank you as always. I thank you for coming here and taking almost 2.5 hours. Honestly, I'll say this to you again off mic as well when I drop you off at home, but especially given your schedule and everything that you're working on, I appreciate everyone who takes time to be on the show, especially where I know you've got these deadlines that you're up against. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. It's always so much fun.
Oh, thank you, man. It's always a blast for me too. It's like a vacation coming in, hanging out and talking about this stuff. It's fun. So
awesome. That was episode 100, folks. I was really looking forward to doing this, and it was a blast. And I'm glad we got to sort of take stock of what the journey has been. And I remain glad that this was the title for the show that we went with, especially the subtitle, because it really has been a journey. And I'm very grateful to everyone who's been on this journey with us. And I hope you'll stick with us for the next 100 episodes because they're coming.
All right, man. Can't wait.
All right. So thank you, Ken. Thank you, audience. Make sure you come back in 1 week. Like I said, we'll be talking about Superman Space Age. And until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. This show is part of the Flat Squirrel Podcast Network, home to Digging for Kryptonite, another exciting episode in the adventures of Superman, Summoning the Zords, and My Comic Shop History, available wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review today. Sign up at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato for additional content. Thank you all.